adjourn right now. We're done.
Great. So it does look like we are live now. So I will go ahead and open the meeting and get to our remote meeting script. And then we will go from there. So as a preliminary matter, this is Ashley Erisman, the chair of the Nantucket Conservation Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Beal.
Here. Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Ashley Erisman, aye. Ian Golding.
Aye.
Dave
Aye.
Lefevre.
Aye. I just lost my picture, but I'm here.
Okay. And Joe Topham.
Aye.
And hopefully Maureen will be with us shortly. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Jeff Carlson.
Here.
Joanne Dodd.
Aye.
Okay. Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Art Gasparo.
Here.
Paul Santos. May have walked away. Don Bracken.
Here.
Brian Madden. And Burton Balkind.
Here.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening. This open meeting of the Nantucket Conservation Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Nantucket Conservation Commission is convening by video conference via Zoom app, as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I, the chair, will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or your computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair leads the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. And for items of public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. Staff will activate the chat feature on YouTube. Members of the public who have comments or questions can use this feature to communicate with the public body. Instructions are on the town's website. And please write your full name if you're commenting on YouTube so that we know who you are. And then the chair or staff will do their best to address questions and or comments. And then finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So with that, we will begin the public meeting, public comment. Looks like there's no public comment as of yet. So we can move into the public hearing notices of intent. The following is continued. So Nantucket Point of View LLC at 9 Lincoln Avenue is continued until June 25th. Kim Glowacki at 46 Easton Street is continued until June 25th. That looks like our only continuances. So we will begin with Chuck Rowe Nominee Trust at 25 Quays Road. And this is represented by Art Gasparo and Stephen Cohen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are on a third public hearing for this application, which I believe you're all familiar with, for the repair or installation of a new steel sheet bulkhead in front of a failing timber bulkhead. And as a follow-up to the discussion from the previous hearings, I have provided a supplemental filing where I've tried to address all of the questions, comments, and concerns that had been previously raised. So I'd like to take a few minutes to go through that correspondence. I'm sure you've all had a chance to read it in the packet, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I do think that it is important that we hit on the points that are contained within the letter. What we've done is to get into a detailed analysis of both alternatives as well as potential impacts to the interests that are protected by the commission in each of the resource areas. We also agreed right from the get-go in the beginning of the letter that the applicant would agree to a time of year restriction as well on the work, even though it's not a condition recommended as part of another part of the permitting process. We thought that it would be a good way to meet some of the concerns of the commission. So we would agree to a voluntary condition that there would be no work between April 1st and August 31st. The project is being permitted per the existing Chapter 91 license that, as we've gone over, does require that the owner maintain the license structure. What we're trying to do is present a more environmentally sensitive way to do that maintenance. And by that, what we mean is that the use of driven steel, which is essentially self-supporting, instead of timber that requires tiebacks and dead men, is going to have less impact on the resource areas through its installation. In other words, the steel could be driven, the timber would require excavation and more disturbance of the beach and the bank areas. That can be avoided with the steel option. So we see that as a preferred environmental alternative. The living shoreline, there was quite a bit of discussion as well as materials in your packet from the first meeting. And if you really go back and look through, there's a lot of materials there. And I'd like to bring to your attention and just have a little bit of a discussion of the type of topography and areas where a living shoreline would be well suited compared to this site. If you move further to the east along this shoreline where you have lower topography and a greater area to the south, a greater wider beach, then you would have more opportunity for a living shoreline installation along essentially the base of either a dune or a bank. In this case, if we were to remove the timber bulkhead and try to put in a living shoreline type of an installation, it's very narrow area from the base of the current bank, or if you could imagine what that bank would look like without the bulkhead there, it's going to come straight down to the beach, and the high tides on a very regular basis are going to come all the way up and completely inundate whatever kind of a living shoreline or plantings that you're gonna have there. And one of the premise of the living shoreline are sort of having a wet marsh area, a sort of a low zone, a mid zone, and a higher zone. And there's simply not area with the kind of topography here where we come up from a beach level up to elevation 14 or so in a very short distance, essentially a glacial bank. So we would have to rip out some of that bank and move it back in order to create an area at the base to have that living shoreline installation. And that creates some real concerns related to the act, the regulations, both state and local, as well as logistics for impacts on the area. As I've mentioned in the letter, one of the premises that policies I think that has been longstanding with the commission is that we don't typically destroy one resource area to create another. And that's what would be happening here. You would have to, tear out a bank that's there in order to move it back, and then artificially create some other resource area, whether it would be considered BVW or salt marsh along the base of that bank. So that's not something that I've ever seen, the commission approve or really entertain. And I just don't think that as an alternative to what's here, that would be a good choice. The other issue with or concern related to a living shoreline is the existing bulkhead on the adjacent property. What happens when we cut off what's there and move back? We're going to create a problem on the land bank property for the bulkhead that's there. There is no real solution to how that would be handled. We feel that when you're considering all of the alternatives, the impacts of doing such an installation would far outweigh the benefits. And I don't want to just make those statements. I want hope to convey to the commission that we've looked at it and just don't see that it would work well at this particular site. I do think that living shorelines in certain areas could really be beneficial for both coastal resiliency and protection and protection against storm damage and rising sea levels and all of that. We just don't think that as an alternative to this project at this site that it's the right alternative. We've also, as you may recall from the previous meeting, discussed the creation of a pedestrian easement along the top of the bulkhead. And again, that would be outside of the intertidal zone. So it's essentially a granting of rights in an area that the public, on private property, the public wouldn't otherwise have rights. And by doing the small extension along the easterly property line, we could provide access to that easement from where the end of Quays Road and that parking lot is for access that is used to the beach. And I think it could be a real benefit to the public and allow passage when concerns, especially at the first hearing from the commission, were the lack of passage along the beach in the intertidal zone. Understanding that our project isn't really changing that situation exists currently. So we think that we're offering that it's a large offer and a large benefit, and it's taken a lot of discussion with the owners, and it's somewhat of a sacrifice of private property in order to accommodate the public along the waterfront. And I hope that that's not discounted. Going through the letter a little bit further, I I'd also like to, I included an aerial because I think that one of the things we haven't discussed or only briefly discussed is the context and setting of this particular property and coastal protection in relation to the adjacent shoreline. And it is a part of a armored shoreline that extends over 1,000 feet. And so it's a small, what's being proposed essentially as an extension to just protect the structure from flanking so that it remains structurally sound is a very small percentage of the overall shoreline. And again, that will allow an area where pedestrians that are parked at the parking lot that you can see on the aerial would be able to go along the top of that bank and then over to the west. So I did want to just point out that this isn't a standalone peninsula type armoring situation. And while the shoreline does continue to erode to the east of the installation for a far distance to the west, it does not. In terms of all of the other alternatives, I'm happy to go through and discuss those as much as you would like. But what I looked at essentially was varying degrees of other types of hard armoring that would, to be used along this shoreline. And again, we conclude that all of those alternatives would have a greater level of impact to the protected interests in the resource areas than the selected alternative of the driven steel sheets. The other thing in terms of going through all of the protected interests, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but on a point-by-point basis, we don't feel that the project as proposed is going to have an adverse impact on those protected interests, and that it's essentially, not a change from the conditions that exist. I think the one point to that is subject to some discussion, of course, is the extension, which again, there's already a pile of rock that exists on the Quays road layout, and we think that it's very limited in size. We designed it and proposed it as essentially what we see as just enough to prevent the flanking, if you will, so that we're not getting water behind the structure at that end. The other point of comparison projects, I think, is important. What's being proposed is not atypical to projects that the commission has considered and approved in the past. And I did include a few examples for you. We felt that it was important to come in with a project which is similar to what the commission has approved, and have also wanted to make a point in our correspondence that we fully expect to be held to a similar set of standards and conditions, and are not looking for anything unusual or different compared to these other projects, which are in similar settings as well. Understanding that every site is different, and that it's not that the commission does have the right, and duty to look at each application, though at the same time considering the past action and the similarity of what's being proposed, I think also shouldn't be discounted. And with that, Stephen Cohen is also here, and I would end my presentation in case he wants to add anything, and then would be happy to address questions or additional concerns that the commission might have.
I have nothing to add. I think Art covered the intro. Great, thanks.
Thank you, guys. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Art, for the alternatives analysis presentation. I think it really hits on some of the things that we've been discussing. One of the alternatives that I didn't see listed that was discussed was the potential relocation of the structure back farther from the resource area. Was that considered?
It was, Madam Chair, through you. And I thought that I did hit on that in the living shoreline alternative. Perhaps I could have broken that out separately, but there are other structures on the property. There's also septic systems and wells and on a limited size property. So we don't see much alternative for on this size property. Perhaps it would be helpful to look at the site plan again as well, to look at the kind of distances that you have on this property back. So in other words, the septic system has to serve all of the structures that are on the property, has to maintain setbacks from the harbor and the coastal bank. So while there may be some alternative for some distance, we don't believe that it would be meaningful justification, justified to pick up all the houses and relocate them.
Thank you, Art. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Seth, do you have a follow-up?
Sorry, I was going to say another piece that I had, but if Ian wants to go first, that's fine.
No, go ahead. You can follow up, Seth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The other thing that I was hoping could be considered, especially given the overall kind of aerial imagery and site planning that the representative was talking about, is this is part of a larger armored shoreline system. But I do see that we're at the easterly end of it. And especially with the extension proposed on the easterly edge of this locust property, I was wondering if it was considered or might be possible to, instead of replacing the bulkhead in the location that is currently, to move it back and then to install a hybrid project in front of that. So it would be partially bulkheaded, but partially living shoreline in front. I know there was a discussion about not wanting to change one resource area into another, but I think that doing this type of hybrid project, which is referenced in some of the materials I provided in the packet, there's a history of this happening in other locations where you move the bulkhead back and you maybe shape it in a way to encourage planting in front, could be beneficial both for protecting the resource property and making this a more environmentally friendly solution. It also has the potential to open up access in the intertidal zone for pedestrian use, so that an easement across the property for access might not need to even be issued if there is adequate beach width in front of this hybrid project.
Thank you, Seth. Art, do you have a reply to that?
I think that it goes back to the same alternatives that we've looked at, in that in doing so, there's of course the chance that we would destabilize the bulkhead to the west. There's also the moving back is going to result in a moving back of the entire top of the bank towards the structure that is there and is afforded protection. The distance between the structure that's there and the structure behind it is only about 36 feet. So, the opportunity, and there's also a vegetated wetland that's located to the west along that property line. to be considered. So, and then of course, you know, zoning setbacks, septic systems. So if we move it back, then we're essentially further threatening a pre-78 structure on this property. And I think going back to the fact that we have a license and a permit for the configuration that's there, and we're just trying to, you know, responsibly maintain that, I think is my response.
Thank you, Art. Ian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Art, for all your input. I happen to feel that from protecting our interests, that I'm very sympathetic to Seth's argument, not so sympathetic to the issue of where the septic system might be if it had to be moved. But more importantly, I want to make the point that if that is into the intertidal zone where we're talking about putting the path to bypass it, I'll buy everybody on this commission, you know, and their families a meal in any restaurant they care to go to. I've been out there at high tide. The high tide is lapping 2 feet up on that bulkhead. And so as I said last time, I don't think that the Chapter 91 license is valid still. It was predicated on the fact that when that was initially permitted, that was in fact, you know, beyond the high tide line. I think I asked last time for town council's opinion on it, and I would like to have town council's opinion on that issue going forward. Also, I have to say respectfully that to compare this to Easy Street is totally apple and oranges. You know, Easy Street is an entirely different place. And so it's just muddying the issue, I think. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I know, Art, I appreciate the alternatives analysis that you did. You know, I do think that we need to start looking at these living shorelines and these hybrid projects a little bit more seriously. And when I look at our act and the state act and not transitioning one resource area to another, I feel like that's all these coastal projects do, because a lot of them are actually sitting partially on beaches and then changing those beaches to be considered banks, you know, as you build them up with either core bags or geotubes or bulkheads or whatever. And, you know, when this bulkhead was originally installed, it has impeded those resource areas from actually, you know, functioning and migrating backward as they would. So I do see it as a little bit concerning. And I think being that this property is right next to land bank property, it's almost a better place to be thinking of living shorelines, because you might get them to do the same thing. You know, it's a little bit more feasible in my mind. But I guess I see both sides of this, because normally we do allow bulkhead replacements, you know, in kind. I don't see how we can permit the extension of the bulkhead. But I'm just one member. Joe?
So I went through the green shoreline practices, and I went through their math, and they were saying the best pitch is, or ideal is 7-1 pitch, which is 8 degrees. So what happens is that runs up to about 96 feet from the proposed bulkhead. So that would obliterate or affect the isolated wetland. They would have to go into that isolated wetland that is also saddling onto the Nantucket Island Land Bank's property, and it would obliterate that. So I'm kind of like, well, what do? Do we say get rid of the house, but then, oh, we don't mind if we kill the wetland that's on the other side? I know that's eventually going to happen. There will be things that are going to connect. Even if you did it, the worst case scenario, you did a 4-pitch, you're still touching that wetland. So, and I think to Art's point, which is I was thinking as well, you're going to cut into land bank land. You're going to cause them to come back and say, we need to now protect our property because this property has been obliterated and now there's no homes or anything. They're going to lose land. I think in this instance, there is no way to walk in front of this house. And I hear Ian's point of saying the water is 2 feet high. I get that. I said in the previous meetings that I wish we could go out in front of it and protect that with corals or whatever we could, or add fill, but that's just not the case. By Art coming in to say, listen, we'll grant you a 5 foot wide pedestrian easement in front of it, then I think it's better to go back to land bank and say, can we extend that? And so that someone get by, because even if we remove this, you're not going to get by the land bank's land. You're not going to get by the next person's land. You know, it's no different than Baxter Road, where you have the beach walk or the bluff walk, excuse me. So I just feel like this is kind of a slippery slope where it's, and I think in Seth's assessment of the putting in some green installation that's less impactful to this area, I understand that, but I think that would work on Baxter Road or Easton Street. But at 14 feet, this really isn't that site that really kind of does that. So, and I think as you move along going westerly, that coastline that it rises up to, I think it's like probably 22 feet. I mean, you're rising up. It's going to get worse as we go. I do see Ashley's point. I am having a problem with the new extension, but the only thing benefit for me is I see as a access to the easement. But I am kind of muddled on that one. I mean, I am having a hard time, but I just think this is a really slippery slope. If we don't grant this, then are we going to not allow them on Easton Street, Hobart Ave? And are we going to ask them to do the same thing? And what happens when the waves are coming in, shooting all the way across deeper into Easton Street or almost up to Wall Street? I think that there's a problem where we have to say, it doesn't matter where you are, we're protecting someone, whether you're in town or out of town, it's the same thing. You got to be consistent. And I think in this instance, they have the right to do this. It is part of the within our jurisdiction to grant this. So I don't really see them. I understand, again, I understand what Seth is saying, but I don't think this is the site. And I would hate to say like, this is the case and we have the structure to remove the septic system. Well, when we hit Easton Street and we hit Hobart Ave, we have to be consistent. And what happens is water's hitting those houses. Are they all going to go? Are we going to say every house on Easton Street, you can't get a bulkhead, you're not going to be protected? All those houses have to be moved off? We're really going to dramatically change Nantucket. I don't like this, but title, the seas are rising, we have a problem. And I think SPPF is our first shot across the bow. I think this is another one that's giving us a heads up. We've got a problem coming. I don't know how we protect it, but I feel like this is incremental steps that you have to remember. It's all linked. It's all the shoreline. Eventually, we're going to have to say we have to come to a standard. We have to grant someone. And I think that these people are probably going to get 40 more years in the house, and it's going to circle around the back. It's going to take out Quays Road, and they're not going to have any protection. So that's kind of my pitch. Sorry for my salt box, but there it is. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. 40 years is really optimistic when you look at sea level rise projections, but we'll hope for them. Ian, you had something, and then Mark.
Well, I did, but I totally take Joe's point. But I think the consistency should be protecting what we are charged with protecting, which is the beach as opposed to the houses. And I really want to have an opinion from town council on the limitations of the Chapter 91 bulkheads. And I think that's very important going forward. And we're undoubtedly between a rock and a hard place and a bulkhead here. There's no question of it. And but I don't think that to make some of these comparisons are valid personally. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mark?
I had a question to the chair for Art, if I could. I'm still concerned, I was last meeting, with the end scouring on land bank property, and doing a complete rebuild just continues that process, and it's going to get worse rather than better with the rising water. Is there any solution to that, Art, that you can see other than your new extension and a steel facility?
Art?
So when you mentioned the land bank property, were you referring to the Town Road layout on the east end in terms of continued impacts there? No, I mean, I think that we are dealing in an area of a fairly low wave energy environment. And so I think that what you see there is continued retreat of the unprotected shoreline, and that scour is as a phenomenon, I think is somewhat limited. We're trying to stop, obviously, the water from getting behind the structure and destabilizing it there. But as you all know, there's always, wherever you stop a stabilized shore, wherever a stabilized coastal bank or shoreline ends and a natural shoreline continues, there's always going to be a point there, no matter where. It has to stop somewhere, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I don't think that we're going to see impacts there that are different or worse from the naturally eroding shoreline. It will continue to retreat there. The rate of erosion is fairly low, in these areas. And I think that short of, again, trying to come in and excavate and disturb the existing coastal bank and resource area to try to do, something else, such as a fiber roll array or something sloped there, is going to cause more harm than good. In other words, I think your level of disturbance to do such an installation is going to be of greater impact than the continuing naturally eroding shoreline at that point. And I really think we have to think about, that we're not out on the sound, facing those size waves, or we're not on the eastern shoreline, that it is, within the harbor. And it's really more of the storm surge tides, I think, that tend to act up in this area.
Thank you, Art. Seth, I think you had a question or comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two quick things. I won't talk for too long, but I respect Joe's point about consistency. And I think that as it is written in our regulations that we have to consider these more environmentally friendly projects when anyone is coming in for a request to rebuild or repair a bulkhead. So if projects come in on Easy Street or Easton Street or Hulbert Ave, wherever it is, we should be going through the same process to see if there are feasible alternatives. We don't necessarily have to permit each site in the same way, but I would hope to see we do the same exact process for any future projects. And then the second thing is about the extension. I just can't see how this extension is permittable. And it sounds like from the representative that the point of the extension is to kind of stop create a stop on the property that they have control over, to make a barrier between where the armored shoreline and the natural shoreline is. So without that extension, I'm wondering if the bulkhead is even going to function as intended. And if it's not permittable to permit that extension, then maybe we shouldn't be thinking about doing the bulkhead at all.
Thank you, Seth. Art, do you have a reply to that?
Well, I think we have to do the bulkhead. I mean, we have to do something. We can't take a do nothing approach on the basis of that it's aging and starting to fail, and none of us want to see it just falling into the harbor. So, the point of the extension, I respect and understand and, think is fully for, discussion and how that, but the remainder of that project and I think that, something needs to be done, or the situation is not going to serve the public, the commission, or the owner as well to allow that to fail, and start to crumble and fall in and contribute, debris and all of the negative impacts from that. The points on the extension, I hear what you're saying.
Thank you, Art. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Maureen?
I mean, this is literally us between a rock and a hard place. And I tried to make a list of kind of the pros and cons of allowing this repair to be done, putting aside the extension, or moving to the living shoreline. And it's from a practical, looking at all the practical considerations, I think this makes it, it's very difficult to, I think, and I say this with trepidation, Seth, because obviously you know this much better than I, but the feasibility of doing it where it's so straight up and down in such a narrow space to try and build something new in this particular spot, I think could be very difficult to do, and also the issues of taking this out. I'm also very concerned about how that would get done. On the other hand, if we were to approve this, I would want it to be very clear in the record that this is not, to be looked upon as, oh, well, they let, this old thing be repaired again, and they've done that before, and so we'll get ours repaired as well. I appreciate very much Art's analysis of the alternatives. We rarely get such a thorough analysis, and conclusory statements are usually what we get, God knows. And so looking at it, I think that if we were to approve it, I think it would need to be that this is, this is an exception as opposed to, oh, this is what we always do. And to make it clear that we want a robust alternatives analysis. I mean, this is I just think it's very important that if we do approve it, we make it clear that this is not something that we are going to, that anybody else should rely upon being able to get the same thing in their property, because as everyone admits, every property is different. I mean, I think this is a real tough call. But I think I've said what I said already. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Maureen. Mark?
It's not clear to me from the photograph, the aerial, and from the plan, what specifically is the extension. Ashley, can you help me with that?
So it's on the east side of the property, and I don't have a good picture in front, but it extends from the water backward on like the Quays Road layout.
But it shows that same thing on the aerial of what exists. It shows a hitch in the plan.
There's like, I think, a little bit of a turn backwards on the current bulkhead, but this is going like completely perpendicular to the existing bulkhead, essentially. And
It's
Art,
on page 116, Madam Chair.
so page 116. Art,
Yes.
do you have a better description than mine?
Or it would be, it's approximately 37 feet long, running south from where the rocks are, where the current terminus of the existing bulkhead is, back into the bank. And the length was selected, if I may, Madam Chair, so that it would just capture into the top of the bank that's there, and we would envision essentially that it would be buried. And then, if I may just expand, that's where we saw that it would be a challenge to have an easement that didn't have that kind of a stabilization there, because how would you get, from that upland area to then make your way sort of down that bank and not have it all sliding out. So I think you have a logistical challenge there that we thought that by having it, at this length, just long enough. And the truth is, and as discussed, it will, that other shoreline will continue to erode there, though, given the rate of erosion, we think that it will be, some number of years before it's going to be, a situation there that you wouldn't be able to get from the parking lot and around that property line.
Thank you, Art. Mark, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Ian?
So, Madam Chair, I'm absolutely opposed to the extension, which, I feel would need a waiver. And I also and think that there could be a soft solution there. And also, I would like an opinion from Town Council on this, because I feel that it's not entitled Chapter 91. And so if we end up granting it, then that will be a waiver situation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, do you think we could talk to Town Council about this one?
I can certainly ask if people would like that and file for his opinion and see if he if that's granted.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Are people interested in hearing Town Council's opinion?
I am.
Looks like we have many yeses. Looks like Dave as well. So I think that would be a good opinion to get. And Ian, I have to say, I agree with you. The extension, I don't think I could grant the extension. And I think that softer solutions do need to be looked at for that section. Joe, did you have something to say? And then Seth?
I was agreeing with Ian that we should get Town Council to weigh in, and I agree if have Art do a little more work on that return, because we have to do a waiver. I'm having a little bit of problems with that component. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Oh, Steve?
So I obviously don't have any problem with the commission getting its own legal counsel, and you should. I would say that the idea that the Chapter 91 license is no longer valid based on the changing conditions doesn't make a lot of sense to me legally, but certainly if you want to get a confirmation as to its validity from Town Council, that's not something we'd object to, and we certainly continue to allow that to happen. I think that the commission's vigilance on making sure that any replacement or repair of the system is done in an environmentally friendly way as possible is good. But I think Maureen and Joe seem to have suggested correctly that might not work here because of the logistics, not just in theory. And I think that's where we're coming down on it. That if we could do something better, we certainly would be open to it. But a requirement has to be both beneficial and practical, not just theoretical. And I think the site conditions here don't necessarily allow for it because of the narrowness and also the abutting situations. And then the last thing is that technically you could approve the extension as a water dependent use, which would not require a waiver. I don't think that you're going to, so I'm not going to push it. I just want to note for the record that you actually have done that in one of the three examples that Art submitted. There was an extension that was approved as a water dependent use. And that's not the only one, but that is just one that's in front of you. So I think what we probably want to do here is continue so that Art can tweak the plan to deal with either not having the extension or having the extension redesigned. And that'll give the commission time to get an opinion from Town Council. as to the validity of the Chapter 91 license, and we could reassess from there unless the commission has any further comments or questions that they want to explore. I think that's probably our plan going forward.
I appreciate that, Steve. I think we just need to make sure we've addressed any public comment that's come through, and then certainly we can honor that. Seth, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick thing before we get to public comment. I understand the logistics about the main bulkhead. I've said my piece about living shorelines there, and if it's not feasible, it might not be feasible. But in considering the alternatives for the extension or the return, that might be a good place for a test case of a living shoreline approach in that piece. So I'd like to see that considered.
Thank you, Seth. And then Jeff, are you monitoring public comment?
Yes, I just had the one from RJ Turcott from the Nantucket Land Council, and this is a significant return that is not covered under the bylaws grandfathering clause. The commission must consider it as a separate structure and project. So I think we've talked about that a lot, but I just want to make sure we got that on the record.
Thank you, Jeff. So with that, if there aren't any other questions or comments, Rick, do you have a question?
Well, may I make a comment as a public? Are you taking public comments?
Yes, we're taking public comments.
I'd just like to sort of go back to the town's work at the end of Quay's Road there on the beach. And it seems to me clearly there ought to be a way to integrate your concerns about the extension with what the town was trying to do there and the neighbor to the east, and working out some way for that whole shoreline to be like a bit of a living shoreline, and shared responsibility to minimize any scouring that could possibly come from that type of an extension. And I really haven't heard much of a discussion about what might happen 5 or 10 years from now. But I think we have to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. That might be a good thing for our CRAC committee member to bring up at the next meeting, maybe this location and the potential for living shorelines there. Just a thought.
I take your point entirely, Madam Chair.
So I guess with that, if there are no more questions or comments, we will continue.
Yes, please.
Would you guys like to continue for 2 weeks?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this will continue until June 25th.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And that moves us on to Croquet Pitch LLC at 24 Westchester Street, and that's represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the first public hearing for an application on an existing developed residential property where the applicant is seeking to construct an addition and extend a porch within the buffer zone to isolated and bordering vegetated wetlands. I've tried to use some colors on the plan to highlight the resource areas, which are shown in blue, and then shown in red are the 25 and 50-foot buffer zones. I have not shown the 100-foot buffer zone as they overlap, and essentially there's no area of the property that's beyond the jurisdiction of the commission. The project has been designed to avoid the 50-foot buffer zone, so that the new structural components are located outside of the 50. The one area that I would like to bring to your attention or discuss is that on the back side of the smaller structure, there is an existing covered porch, which they would like to enclose at the same size footprint. So that's in the 50. Whether that needs a waiver or doesn't, I think is subject to some discussion, but certainly I've requested that waiver. There's no expansion of footprint. It's just a conversion, if you will, of that space, and it's already roofed. On the main house, you can see that there is a fairly modest small extension to go out where the existing porch is, and then a new porch would come off of that, as well as a covered walkway to connect the two structures. And we've included the architectural drawings as part of this application. What I would say is that I do have a revised plan that I've developed this week, and I did not want to submit that given that it was after the deadline, though I would like to discuss it with you, and whether you want me to show it on the screen or not, I'll first just tell you what it is. Essentially, there's no change to the proposed project elements, though in response to concerns that I had a discussion with a representative for one of the abutters, what we've agreed to do, and I think this is all positive for the commission as well, is to move the dewatering area from the west side of the east side of the property to the west side of the property, to create a rain garden for the downspouts to go to, and to put siltation fencing that would go along the east side of the driveway. If you'd like, I could put that plan up, or we could wait to discuss it later and then see where the hearing goes. But the project elements all remain the same. The other aspect, of course, of the project that I think we need to spend some time on is that we have requested a waiver for the 2-foot separation to groundwater. There is no alternative in this situation with the depth to groundwater. So what we've done, and I've included a foundation detail in the application, is to, through working with the structural engineer, gone to a very shallow footing, which is only going to be about a foot below grade. And then we would put that on a couple of feet of gravel. So I don't even think that dewatering is likely to be needed on this site. The bottom of the footings are going to be above the groundwater. The gravel would be in the groundwater, but the method of construction or installation would essentially be that we would, dig out to a depth of about approximately 3 feet, a small trench, and then as you're digging that with a small excavator, that material would go straight into a dump truck, and then you would immediately fill that trench back in with gravel, which of course the groundwater can freely, flow through. And then we would pour the footings on top of the gravel at a depth of only, about 1 foot below grade, which is above the estimated seasonal high groundwater elevation. So we don't have really a need for dewatering the way you often would in a situation that you needed to hold the groundwater down in order to allow your footings to cure. So we are within that 2-foot zone because there's simply no alternative. But we've tried to take look at all alternatives and take all design precautions and available measures so that there's no impact on the groundwater, and that essentially, we don't see dewatering being likely, but just in case, I wanted to make sure that, that there is a provision for that, and it would again only be temporary. No crawl space, no need for, ongoing pumping, anything of that nature. And like I said, in terms of additional impervious area, what I'll have is a revised plan for you, which if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to share it on the screen. I'll file it, and then whether that's, meets all of the commission's concerns tonight or requires a continuance, we can decide that after, if that is okay.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with you sharing the revised plan so we can see it.
Okay. Is everybody able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, so what I did was to move the black square was and when I say dewatering area, it's essentially hay bales with siltation fencing that had been over here, and so we've moved it to just behind the area of work. And then the thick dashed black line is a proposed silt fence, which would run along the edge of the existing driveway. Again, all of this work is proposed within existing landscaped areas. The addition is proposed within an existing hard pack, shell driveway. So while it's not asphalt, it's certainly not, completely pervious area. And then what I've called for in terms of a rain garden is within existing lawn area along the side of this wetland. We would, carve out just down approximately 1 foot or so, a nice, remove lawn grasses and create a swale, and then use native wet zone species in that. And we would only select plants that are from the Biodiversity Initiative's pamphlet on landscaping with native plants on Nantucket, understanding that, a more detailed design would be needed for that, but that if this is acceptable to the commission, where you'd have, some plants on the bottom of the swale that, are more water loving or, wet friendly. And then on the sides, you would have sort of a little bit of a transition, and we would run the downspouts. The structure will have gutters. The existing structure has gutters. So we would connect those over to into this swale. Again, we don't see a large significant increase in runoff as a result of this project. Back to the point that the addition is in a driveway area, and the porches are the enclosure for the addition for the main house is primarily within existing porch, and the only real change is some porch areas of primarily some of it which is already over some walkways and lawn area. So we think that ultimately the having a rain garden type of an area on the property that it currently doesn't have that sort of area to allow for some plants and vegetation to uptake some of that water is a benefit. And we believe that the waiver for the project is justified. And with that, I'd be happy to try to address additional questions or concerns that you may have with the application.
Thank you, Art. Right, so I think I have to have you stop screen sharing, and I can see if there are questions.
There you go.
Thank you.
Back to me.
Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Art through you. Just in relation to the waiver request, I'm wondering, I think we will need the waiver amended to include that rain garden work described within the 25-foot buffer.
Agreed.
And then also, I'm just wondering if the use of helical piers instead of a slab foundation was considered for the conversion of the porch to the addition areas.
Madam Chair, may
Yes.
we did talk about the helical piers, but part of the typically on the sites that have helical piers that are supporting living space type areas, there's a slab that's poured on top of those helical piers. So the helicals are put in to provide structural strength, and then they pour a mono or a cap slab on top of that. In this case, if you were to go to, whether it was a helical pier or a piling, because we're going off of an existing structure that's already very low to grade, then your joists, the bottom of that structure for the house is essentially going to be right at grade, and then you're going to have problems with rot and moisture. And so it was a discussion that I had with the architects and structural engineer in terms of what are our alternatives. And so that's why and again, the helicals would end up going down into the water as well.
Thank you, Art. I just have a question. This property was essentially developed or redeveloped about 5 years ago. Is that correct?
I'd have to go back and look. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I didn't work for them. I didn't work for them then. But I do recall seeing some orders of conditions in my research from past work on this property. Yes.
Okay. And maybe it's a better question for Jeff, because I think it maybe was permitted right before I got onto the commission. I'm just wondering if we ever, or the commission at that time, needed to do an analysis of like change between the 25 and 50 here. I just see, like, I think when this was up before the commission like 6 years ago, it was kind of an issue because of the extensive development between these three wetlands. And I guess I'm just concerned to see that development continue. And I am worried about the 2-foot separation to groundwater in a site that's really, I don't think should be developed probably any further for the health of the resource areas. Jeff, do you remember when this maybe was permitted like 6 years ago?
Vaguely, I don't have the exact details, but I can certainly pull those and get those for you.
Yeah, I would love to see kind of what the commission's conditions were on that project.
Sure. I think we could put together, if it's helpful, whatever the orders were, and then we might even be able to pull some of the minutes from those meetings as well, if you're
Yeah, I
interested.
think that would be great. Thank you, Jeff. Joe?
I agree with you, Ashley. I was quite surprised by this site, but I went to the GIS maps that said this structure, original structure, was built in 1967, but it looks like in 2005 it changed hands, and seems like some extensive work was done. So I agree. I'd like to see what past conditions we put on this project, on this property. So thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Maureen?
Thank you. Because my concern also was with the groundwater issue, and that kind of cramming, that does seem to be a case of cramming the last possible thing that could be done on this site, which is clearly a potentially very fragile site. So I would be very interested in seeing what did I mean? Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. So I guess I am concerned about just the existence of the additional structures within this, and also the stuff between the 25 and 50. I'm concerned about that as well. So that's all.
Thank you, Maureen. Ian, did you have a comment? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. I just wonder whether the GIS card is accurate, because it says 67 for the main building and 2001 for the garage apartment. So I'm surprised.
Yeah, I know, just because I knew someone who was landscaping here, the pool, and like there was a big addition expansion within the last 5 years.
Absolutely.
And that's all new, but it looks like Jeff will be able to dig some of the old documents out for us.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Dave?
Yeah, I'd like to see if there's something that recent, but I'd also like to mention, Art, that I thought that was very creative with your foundation plan. That would reduce the impact as much as you possibly could to the groundwater by creating a gravel base and pouring very shallow. I thought that was very creative.
Thank you.
Joe?
I agree with what Dave's saying. I appreciated the foundation detail. I thought that was well said and well designed. But I do agree with Maureen. I do think that the squeezing every last bit out of the lemon that they can get, and there's no, giving back into the wetland, building into the resource area. I just think that it's a lot, and we're getting nothing back. So I just feel like the resource area is extremely under stressed because of this, and it's going to be even more so. So, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Ian?
Otherwise known as the shoehorn syndrome.
Yeah. Art, did you have a comment?
Sure. I would just say that I have up, and whether you want me to share the screen or file this subsequently, the 2003 aerial, which shows all the structures, essentially in the same footprints that they are right now. And that goes back to 03. There was additional work, I think, that you recall that we can get the permitting that had to do with, I think, some patio, maybe deck type areas, but the around the back. But essentially the driveway, the lawn, the edges of disturbance, the aerial that I'm looking at from 2003, it's all the same. And I do respect the commission's points in terms of, that there's some infill going on here, but I would also ask that you consider that is being balanced to respect the 50-foot buffer zones. And you can even notice that where the addition is, there's a jog out, the architects, and the project has been designed to meet your regulations, understanding that, that there are constraints, on this property. So I guess I'll just leave it at that, and we can, once you're done with any comment or whatnot, we certainly would request to continue to provide some of the information that you've requested.
Thank you, Art. Maureen?
Yeah, excuse me, Art, one thing, what is the patio made of? What's up? Is that a stone patio or
Yeah.
what? One that's in front of is that the porch that's going to be now covered?
Yes, it's a stone patio.
So would it,
Oh, sorry, Maureen, go
oh
ahead.
no, would it be possible to have that be something that's, more permeable than that? I'm just curious. Or it's just
It
leaving.
is dry laid bluestone, so it's not, at least
Oh, okay. All right.
I believe it is. It appears that way. It doesn't look mortared to me.
Okay.
There's also quite a bit on the backside of decking, which presumably would allow, some water to flow through it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Joe, do you still have a comment?
Yeah, through the chair to Art. Art, I understand what you're saying about how the new design is sensitive and it stays within the 50, but I think we have probably about 1,000 square feet that is within the 25 to 50. And I think that's where I'm having a little bit of a problem with this project. And I think the timing of when this was built, I understand that, but I think going forward, I think we're really putting a lot of impact on the resource areas within this property and adjacent to this property. So I just feel like something's got to be given back. I mean, you've got a tennis court or whatever it is on the easterly side, and then you've got spas and decks. I mean, it's extremely developed and a lot of impervious, stone and decks, etc. I just don't really get the warm and fuzzies about this. Thank you.
If I may, Madam Chair, no, it's not a tennis court. That's just a lawn area.
Okay.
Just so that you know that it is just pure, impervious. I mean, pervious.
Okay. It's
But
tough to tell on the GIS map.
yeah, no, I understand. We'll work on this for sure. I hear the feedback that I've gotten from the commission, and I'll discuss it with the architects and the clients and get you some more details at a minimum on the rain guarding and the waiver request.
Thank you, Art. And it looks like, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't look like there's any public comment for this one.
No, not as of yet. And I asked for that at least 10 minutes ago. So
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say there's no public comment. So commissioners, are we finished with questions or comments for Art? Okay, so then Art, would you like to continue for 2 weeks?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this will continue until June 25th.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that moves us on to 62 Cliff Road Realty Trust at 62 Cliff Road, and this is represented by Brian Madden.
Good evening, everyone. Brian Madden, representing the applicant The proposed project involves an addition replacing an existing deck onto the single-family dwelling. The proposed deck is entirely within the 50-foot buffer zone and also largely within the 25-foot buffer zone. There's no structural expansion, so it's a replacement in kind. Given site conditions, access is going to occur within the 25-foot buffer within existing lawn landscaping areas that will be restored to pre-existing conditions. We have requested a waiver for the proposed project. And one of the elements that's proposed here is because it's an elevated deck, about 2 to 3 feet off grade, a small addition, we are proposing helical pier supports for the 233 square foot addition to avoid groundwater intrusion and the need for dewatering. Best management practices will be incorporated into construction as well. You'll see the erosion control barriers in the back lawn. And again, everything will be restored to pre-existing conditions, and no structural expansions, just working within the existing footprint. So just conversion of structural features. And I'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions from commissioners? So, Brian, currently, is this deck such that water can flow through the slots?
Very limited. The boards are pretty tightly bound, so there'd be some minimal infiltration, but mainly it's just runoff.
Okay. I have to say, I do not like these transition decks to living space, and I don't think I could allow this to be permitted and transitioned personally, given where it's located.
Yeah, I agree. So,
Joe?
I agree. I think that it's so close. I just don't agree with this. So thank you.
Maureen?
And I the same. I mean, the location, it doesn't make any sense. I just don't see it. Thank you.
Any other, Dave?
Yeah, my sentiment's the same. Not in that zone.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments from commissioners? All right. Let's see if the public. Jeff, can we give the public a chance to weigh in here? Wait.
Sorry, I was trying to bring it up on my computer and didn't type. So,
Madam Chair, do you mind if I ask a few questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. So specifically, what are the commission's concerns relative to potential adverse impacts in the resource areas? And then secondly, maybe through the chair, asking staff if it's generally been the commission's practice that if you're working with an existing structural footprint, I'm not familiar of any denials on that end. It's just replacement of existing footprint. Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, I know one of my concerns, if you're bringing the walls of that structure out further, you're bringing windows closer to the wetland that can impact like birds and organisms that live in the wetland, increasing striking the side of the building. So you're transitioning that open air space where even if there's minimal flow through of your, water through the deck, there is some. And then you have a roof that's also, gonna direct runoff differently than the current deck. So that's kind of my thinking there. I don't know if Joe, you have a comment.
I also agree. I think once you eliminate this deck, I feel that people are going to move even closer towards that wetland. And I think that's kind of a concern where, and I agree with Ashley, you're gonna have windows and you're gonna have light, and that's also gonna affect the resource area, the wetlands. Yeah, I just think it's gonna be really problematic for this wetland. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a classic example of mission creep.
So any other, Jeff?
I'm sorry. Did you want me to answer the part of that question that Brian had asked too?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the commission has in past practice allowed for kind of structural conversions in spots, but even for those, you'd still within having to meet performance standards or getting applicable waivers as part of that conversion. So again, each one is a little bit different, but it has been permitted, but you still have to meet the basic qualifications to get that permit.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm vaguely remembering a project that Art did with decks near wetlands, and we had him do like a wetland mitigation area to compensate for it. So it was like multiple discussions, and that was for like a little, I want to say a really little deck. So.
Yeah, and just real quickly, I know it's not necessarily, it's pretty clear on the plan, but it's a little bit tricky. But part of the existing wetland area is currently in lawn, and the wetland line runs through the lawn. If you look at the little leader arrows coming off that on the plan, you can see that, and there's the existing post and rail fence that runs through the wetland partially. So there is something there that wetland is partially developed already.
Thank you, Jeff.
But that being said, the wetland delineation we do agree with by Plants and Soils is correct as shown on the plan.
Thank you. It looks like still no public comment on this one.
No.
Any other final thoughts from the commission? So Brian, what would you like to do? Would you like to continue here?
Yes, we'd like to continue for 2 weeks to review with the applicant and let you know how we proceed forward.
Okay, so this will continue until June 25th. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so that moves us on to amended order of conditions, 11 Meadow Lane LLC, and this is represented by Paul Santos.
Thank you. For the applicant, 11 Meadow Lane LLC, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors. This is an amended order of conditions request we are seeking permission to remove invasive vines between the 25 and the 50-foot setback to a bordering vegetated wetland. 11 Meadow Lane is a residential lot in which we came before the commission for redevelopment, in which we permitted a pool structure and a dwelling within the 100-foot buffer zone to a bordering vegetated wetland, which is essentially a drainage ditch that runs parallel with the rear property line for this property. We did not request or receive any waivers for that application, and we did, however, agree to a condition on the plan that Ian had requested, which said that there would be no work or alteration is permitted inside the 50-foot setback. So although this is essentially, I don't think, work per se, we did agree that the 25 to 50, we would treat like the 0 to 25 as a no disturb. And we still have no problem doing that. The issue is we've got some pretty good invasive vines that are on the backside of the property that are choking off some cedar trees and some other trees that we do have back there that we would like to go in and hand prune and just take out in this area. This would be between the 25 and the 50. I did speak to Jeff and Joe about it. They felt it did, because of that condition on the original order, it warranted coming back to the commission and asking for an amended order of conditions. There are some pictures in the packet of these two areas that we're talking about, and that is the extent of the request. happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Paul. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just looking to Paul for a few follow-up questions I have. One, what species or species of vine is there? It's hard to tell from the photos. And also, what is the estimated square footage or acreage of the area that you're hoping to remove of those invasive vines?
I have an answer for neither one of those for you, Seth. I mean, there are two clumps that are basically associated. One is just a clump that's sitting out that's probably, 20 foot square, if even that. The other area is probably a little bit bigger, and it's engulfing a number of cedar trees. This work would be done by hand, obviously.
Yeah, if I may respond, I'm all for removing invasive vines in practice, but just wanting to make sure that the vines indeed are invasive, not just a non-native, or not just a native aggressive plant. And just before the work is done, getting that species list and the square footage would put me at ease here.
Thank you, Seth. Jeff, have you been on this site? Have you seen what the invasive vines are? Can you ID them?
I certainly could go out and ID them. I haven't, to be perfectly honest, I haven't been out on the site since our original site visit for the original order, because the original order was just done at the end of 2018. And when this came in, we were still doing kind of limited site visits, but I'm happy to go out there and take a look to verify what it is.
Thank you.
I'm willing to identify them too. I mean, we're in the early stages of landscaping here, so if the commission feels that, come back at the next meeting, I have no problem doing that. But again, I think this was, when we agreed to the 25 and 50, this area just came up when they started doing the landscaping out there, and they felt it was that these things were overtaking some of the mature growth in the backyard there. So.
Thank you, Paul. Dave, did you have a question?
No, I was going to make a comment. I think Seth's, it's a perfectly legitimate request. I think we would want to know what is going to be cut. And to kind of calculate it by a picture, it would be good to have a measured area so that we know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I can measure up there are two clumps that they can easily be measured. So.
Thank you, Paul. Seth?
Yeah, again, thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, I could look at the photos and guess what it might be. It could be bittersweet or clematis or something like that. But just having a really solid on the ground ID is gonna put me at ease here.
Okay, I'll have the landscaper I'll have that have them provide me with what it is, and then I'll go out and measure the actual limits of work.
Yeah, I'll go check it as well.
Okay.
Just to verify what they ID it as.
Thank you. There any public comment on this one? I'm assuming probably not, since our public is small and we're part of
We have not gotten any to this point, Madam Chair.
Yeah, with only 14 viewers and us probably being many of them.
Well,
probably not a lot. So if there are no other questions or comments from commissioners, Paul, would you like to continue this for 2 weeks?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this will continue until June 25th.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So that moves us on to certificate of compliance. We have the Constance K. Keever Revocable Trust at 23 Monomoy Road, and this is represented by Don Bracken.
Good evening, Don Bracken, Bracken Engineering. I understand that this was discussed at the last meeting and there were some concerns about the roof drainage system that was shown on the original plans that was not installed. We had shown infiltration system for the roof runoff on the first plan we submitted. It wasn't something that was added after it because of any concerns raised by the commission. And apparently, the house had been designed without any gutters. And if you were to look at the house and the eave system, was designed so that it wouldn't have gutters. We submitted an as-built plan, conservation as-built plan, appears that everything else is in compliance. And we feel that the roof drains in this case are not required. If you look at the roof pitches, and most of the runoff from the roof comes down and lands in the mulch bed areas around the building. And then the side of the property toward the wetland area, there's a 10 or 12 foot wide pervious shell driveway. And there's a small section of roof that lands on that side of the house. I have a photo I'd like to share in a minute. And then along the edge of that driveway on the wetland side, it has steel edging. So if you've been out there, when you look at this picture, you can see that all roof runoff should be absorbed on site with no runoff going toward the wetland. So with that, may I share a picture?
Yes, you can screen share, and then I think Jeff will probably need that picture submitted to him.
Sure. Right. Can everybody see that, the photo?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what I was talking about, the driveway. The wetland is to the left of the photo. And you can see there's a fairly small roof area over the porch that would land in the previous driveway. The rest of the roof area, you can even see some little splash up along the edges where the shrubbery is. But we feel most of the runoff will be contained. And if anything did overwash during a significant storm to the driveway, it would be contained in the driveway. What doesn't leach through the driveway would be contained with the steel edging, which would then go into the road. And there's a catch basin, town catch basin in front of the site that it would drain toward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I know I still have concerns about not having the underground drainage. I just, any runoff that's channeled towards the driveway is going to pick up materials that were in the driveway that might have, come out of the cars, et cetera. And then it can bring those materials, to the road or potentially to the resource area. So I would rather not depend on the town catchment at the bottom of the driveway, but really have roof drainage that we know is contained on site. But that's just me.
I mean, I would say in the houses that we see, I mean, probably at least, half of them don't have roof drainage systems, and the water is taken care of in this fashion. Well, in some cases, they had drainage, stone drip edges, I should say, instead of where it lands in the mulch. I think it's a very minimal amount of water. I think 90% of it will get absorbed into the driveway, and then even by the time it gets to the town drainage catch basin, it's going to be pretty well filtered from up in that area. And again, it's a very small area, just that roof area. I don't see the benefit of changing the entire style of the house to add gutters and put in an infiltration system for that small area.
Joe?
Based on the photos of the way this house has a single story porch, I kind of feel like the water is being distributed evenly, more or less, along the front of the property. So I think if we put it into a downspout, I think then you get an extreme concentration in one area. So I kind of have to agree with Dawn. I think that as much as I'd prefer to have a gutter in front of my house, I think in this instance, it's actually working out to be a benefit for what we were asking. I think the photographs really help tell the story. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any other thoughts from commissioners? Okay. Well, if there's not, I guess, is there a motion to issue the certificate of compliance?
Motion to issue.
All right, that goes to Joe and seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal. Oh, you're muted.
Aye.
All right, Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Slightly annoyed, aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham,
Aye against Ian.
with me in the middle. Also being a little bit perturbed by this one, but it is what it is.
I'm bobbing and weaving over here.
Yeah. So that passes unanimously, issuing the certificate.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
John.
Thank you.
And that moves us on to 46 Shimo Pond Road Nominee Trust at 46 Shimo Pond Road, and this is represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've filed a certificate of compliance application for this was a residential redevelopment project, and we believe that the work is was done in substantial compliance. This was the house that was ripped down. There used to be a pool there. So some of the elements that you notice, which are in the buffer zones, were part of the permitting, the plan. The structural elements are all match what was there. The limit of work was the lawn that used to be there. There was a silt fence up and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Art. Jeff, has staff been out to look at this site?
Yes, we have been. We were out there. I feel like on all the days are the same now, but I feel like on Monday or Tuesday we were out there for the most recent time. It's a site we check pretty regularly, anyways, and as we know, they have a separate application in, which caused us to be out there as well. But we're recommending that the certificate could be issued for this project, but are recommending that there are some ongoing conditions for the photo monitoring, which is 19. 20, 21, and 22 related to the pool. 23, that all exterior lighting is to be directed away from resource areas. 25, that no lighting is permitted in the dock area. And those are the ones that we're recommending as ongoing.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? And if there's not, is there a motion to issue the certificate with ongoing conditions 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 25?
Good work.
So motion made by Dave and seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal? Oh, you're muted.
Aye.
Engelborg?
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding?
Aye.
LaFleur?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Topham?
Aye.
Okay, so that carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that moves us on to minor modifications, the Hannah Gardner House LLC at 6 Gull Island Lane, and this is represented by Jeff Blackwell.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is a notice of intent. There's a notice of intent that came before you last year for the renovation of this structure that is sort of right behind the restaurant there in Center Street, whose name escapes me because I never dined there. But the commission approved a renovation of the structure and some additional structure to the rear of the main original mass of the building to be added. And the architects have continued to refine the design and asked that I come back and receive permission to modify the order of conditions by adding about 63 square feet to the previously approved footprint. The new or proposed footprint that modifies the previous approval is no closer than 69 feet away from the wetland boundary on the other side of Gull Island Lane. So all the work complies with the 50-foot minimum setback, and the 63 square foot addition is fairly modest within the buffer zone. That's about the summary that I have for you.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners?
Oh, I need it. It's American Seasons, and they used to do a damn good pork crackling.
That's what it is.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? All right, seeing not. Jeff, do we have everything we need to issue the minor mod?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion to issue the minor mod?
Motion issue.
I think Mark got you, right? You wanted to motion, Mark? Don't want to make the same mistake as last week. And then Maureen, I'll give you the second.
Thank you, Ashley.
And then by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, so that carries unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that moves us on to orders of conditions.
And nothing to talk about.
And we can't do any of them, so we'll skip that and
Labor
go.
Day.
Yeah, another 2 weeks from now. We'll move on to extension requests. We have 43 Westchester Street Realty Trust at 43 Westchester Street. This is represented by Don.
I think Don hopped off, so I'll just run it real quickly. So this was for the construction of a couple of additions and a patio with a deck and redoing a driveway. They haven't started work yet, but they're intending to. But their permit expires in July, so they are seeking the 3 one-year extensions to get started and do the project.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions from commissioners, or is there a motion to issue the 3 1-year? Dave, do you have a question?
No, I'm just gonna put that motion out there to extend.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Seth. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, so that carries unanimously, issuing the 3 1-year extensions. And then we move on to Town of Nantucket at Sacagawea Road.
I'll take this one too. So this was the project, for anyone that remembers, where Sacagawea Road takes the kind of left-hand turn to run down towards the beach. The homeowner to the adjacent homeowner donated kind of some vegetation restoration and invasive species removal that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later. But they had completed some of the work and now have to redo some of the work. And we felt it easiest to keep some of the monitoring components going to extend the order. So the order is set to expire this year. And they applied before kind of before the expiration date. So they're still good for extension. We just haven't had any meetings. So they're requesting the 3 1-year extensions to fix some damage that was done and do the monitoring that goes with that, related to something we'll talk about when we get down into my report and enforcements and things. So They're just looking for those 3 one-year extensions at this point.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions from commissioners, or does somebody want to make the motion to issue 3 one-year extensions?
Motion to issue.
Is there a second?
Sure.
I think Ian got you, Dave. So Ian gets a second by roll vote. Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, so that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to Lisa and Simon J. Vanderborn at 135 Wellwinnet Road. And this is represented by Art Gasparo.
All right. It was, but he's gone too. So I can't say I blame him. So they're only requesting a 1-year extension in this case. This is a project, I don't remember who talked about it, who was on the commission, but a pretty significant residential redevelopment and removal of some walkways and putting in a new walkway and cutting off some other walkways through wetlands and shifting and picking up a house. They're mostly done with the project, but they have some stuff to wrap up, and their permit is set to expire here in July. So they're seeking a 1-year extension to complete the project, hopefully in the next little bit, and then we'll be in for their certificate of compliance. So they're just seeking a one-year extension.
So moved.
All right, is there a second? Seconded by Dave.
Second.
So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, so that 1-year extension request carries unanimously. And that moves us on to other business, approval of minutes from May 28th, 2020. Did everybody have a look at the minutes? Okay. So is there a motion to approve as drafted?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, thank you, Terry, for the minutes.
Thank you, Terry.
Yes.
And then that moves us on to the potential enforcement at Sacagawea Road that I think Jeff alluded to, and this is being presented by Sarah Alger. Oh, you're muted.
You're still on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, do you want me to present it, Jeff, or do you want to?
Why don't I'll kick it off, and then
Okay.
you can correct my errors and put them on the right path.
Okay.
So just to kind of go, Sarah's client and the abutter that had done the work that was there had completed the work, and then without their direction or permit approval, one of the butters that we kind of tracked down and traced back via a hose, specifically to I will get the address wrong off the top of my head, but I feel it was like 8 Sacagawea Road. Did some work, removed some of the plantings, and now has gone as far as planting their own tomato plants and doing some other work to that area that was not covered by the permit and typically wouldn't be permissible. So I think there's a couple issues. One, that there was unpermitted work done on the land of the town and on Sarah's client's land that is a bit of a trespass, one, and then the fact that work was done without version of permit. So we don't do it often. I think what we would like to do is allow the work to get fixed under the existing permit and not place the property owners under the direct enforcement, but issue the enforcement out to the owner of the property that we were able to document was doing some of the work and doing the watering and having the hose hook up to their house and issue it to that property owner specifically to cease and desist. And then let that work get undone correctly. That sound about right, Sarah? Did I miss anything?
It does. I guess the only thing that I would add, of course, is my client is really upset that this has happened because it was significant work that was done originally. The gift to the town was that was accepted by the select board was $12,000. It was a bamboo and other invasive eradication on this bank. We had Seth Wilkerson do a whole plan of appropriate plantings. It was done under strict, compliance with your orders. It's been doing great. And then to have someone who, just as an aside, is a town employee, go in and just kind of wantonly, without any permission at all, destroy it all, including taking out at least one mature tree. And the police were called and they issued some sort of a citation, I think, which is now, I think, in the hands of the town. Even after that criminal citation was issued, the person continued to water, continued to plant, did the tomato plantings, added a bench. It's just sort of shocking. And we've had someone go out and give us an estimate as to what it's going to cost to do the replacement, including the tree and all of that. And now it's like $18,500 to do this work. And my client's going to undertake it. I'm hoping there's a way for you to order some sort of restitution. I don't know if you have the power to do that. I'm going to have to do some research on that. But I would hope in whatever order you issue, it would be very strong.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's all I can say.
So I just want to make sure I have this correct. So Sarah, your client was in contract with the town, did this great restoration, and then a neighbor came in and essentially did their own thing on the town land.
And cut everything down and planted grass and tomato plants. Okay. Erected split rail fence and installed a bench.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
What's the address of Sarah's client's person? What's their address?
Oh.
It is 45 Quidnet Road.
That's right, 45 Quidnet Road. So when you come down the Quidnet Road and then you take a right on Sacajah and you head towards the pond, my client's property is to the right. The town strip is directly in front of you. And then that house that's kind of below the bank that I believe is owned by Danielle De Benedictis is on the left.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, did you have a question?
I do. So, Sarah, why can't there be a case of criminal trespass with triple damages? And as an aside, without levity, do you lend your books?
This is a lending library, yes. I've been told by the police that because the damage is primarily on the town property, that the criminal charges fall with the town and my client doesn't have standing to press the criminal charges.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So was he.
So we're trying to sort that out a little bit on our end because it's not a situation that we often come up with or run into. I'll be honest, in my decade of sitting on these, this is really the first time where it's come up in a situation like this. So we've inquired about how to pursue that matter for doing damage to a gift to the town. And I'm kind of waiting to hear back on that. But I think at a minimum, we would at least like to get an enforcement issue to the specific individual that clearly tells him to stop. And then as we pursue it further, can provide further updates, but want to at least get that in and signed by the commission and delivered to them. We'll probably do a certified mailing and then a hand delivery as well, just to make sure that it gets to who it is and says, please stop. We're looking into further action against the damage done to the property of the town, and then pursue it from there. But at least then we've started our process of stopping it, and then hopefully with the permit allowing the work to get fixed.
Yeah, Jeff, this sounds like one where we need that property owner to come in front of us. For sure.
Oh, definitely. That'll definitely be part of it as well, for them to make an appearance in front of the commission.
Yeah. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, this is an egregious violation. And I think that the cease and desist order is a great start. I think we need to really look to see what additional penalties or fines we can impose, whether it's through the commission, through the town getting behind this, or through criminal proceeding. But I think even if the violation happened on town land, how I'm seeing it or how I'm hearing it is Sarah's client restored a resource area, and then this violator cut down that resource area. So there was a wetland violation here. So I think.
Oh, that's very clear.
So I think we need to do whatever types of penalties or fines as the commission we can enforce as well, even if in the grand scale of things it's negligible compared to whatever else happens. We should do whatever we can here.
Yeah, so just to kind of update is we have a request into, we're pretty grateful that they filed a police report because that's solid documentation for us. The big problem that we have with a lot of enforcements where we have abutters that go and do work and is kind of an example. We've issued a lot of enforcements over the years against the land bank for people that take it upon themselves to cut land bank property or put fencing up or parking spaces or a million different things, and kind of issue them friendly enforcements to help rectify that. But very rarely are we able to clearly enforce against a specific individual where we know the activity is going, and that's what makes some of those situations difficult. This is one that it's very clear. So that's why we're recommending, while it's not the permit holder or the property owner issuing the enforcement against the documented party that actually committed the violation.
Thank you, Jeff. Joe?
I wish we could say, here's a bill for $18,500. Pay it, and you're going to watch us put it all back together. I'm really kind of frustrated that someone would do this, especially a town employee. So sorry for your clients there.
Yeah, I think it unfortunately speaks to kind of widespread trespass that gets done on Nantucket. You know, people do not check their property boundaries and just assume it's theirs. But I think in this case, it sounds like this individual knowingly went into an area that was not theirs. So it's really bad.
Yeah, they had to cross the road.
Yeah.
They knew because it was town property, and I think they may have asked the town to do the work.
Yes.
It was to improve the view.
Yeah.
There we go.
You know, because
No view.
yeah, the tree was in the way and some of the plantings. So
No, I think part of it relates to the fact that the town told that individual, no, that what was permitted is what was going in, and that's what was going in, and that wasn't satisfactory. So,
Maureen?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I just have a question. Why aren't we mentioning the name of the town employee? Is it because I'm just curious. We can't. Is there a issue with? I don't know. I can't imagine why don't we know that?
no, that's fine. No, is the gentleman in question? His name is Charles Johnson.
Okay.
So we'd be issuing an enforcement specifically to him.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts from commissioners?
Well, it sort of leads into this long discussion that we've had over months and years about how to increase the fines. And so I'll bring that up with commissioners' comments, but it does seem that it would help if it was front page news, you know?
Yes, I agree with this one. This seems like it's newspaper worthy.
Yeah.
Given all the players and a paid for restoration. I mean, we couldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we want to see those restorations take place. So to see it knowingly undone is incredibly frustrating. And
especially where they asked and they were told no and they went ahead. I mean,
yeah.
This is a clear violation if someone's like, I want to look at this. I don't know. It's heartbreaking.
What's extremely frustrating, if I may just add, Madam Chair, is that once the police came and said, you can't do this, this isn't your property, this is considered criminal vandalism, it didn't make the person stop. They just continued to do what they were doing.
Wow.
So.
Yeah.
Kind of mind blowing. Dave, did you have a comment?
You guys covered it. It's a shame, and given the fact that they knew that it wasn't their land, that's front page worthy news. Yeah, should be like Ian said, should be.
It's
put out
actually
there.
multiple violations, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like it was multiple times they went over there and did work. Yeah. All right, so I guess we need to make a motion to allow Jeff to issue out the enforcement order to this property owner.
Well, it's to the specific individual, to be fair. I don't know if he owns or rents that property, but it's to the individual specific. So it would be to Mr. Johnson.
Okay, so to issue an enforcement out to Mr. Johnson, who did the illegal work.
And contact the INM.
Sorry, what did you say,
In
Joe?
contact the INM.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Service, like,
Yeah, I agree.
So Dave, are you making the motion?
No, I have a question. So
Okay.
nothing's going to happen to the property owner who requested this guy to do this work?
I don't think, I think he's residing at that residence, Dave.
Oh,
But I
okay.
don't-
He
I
stayed
don't-
there. I get it.
I don't think he owns the property. It's difficult to tell from our assessing records.
Thank you, Jeff.
Motion to issue.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal? Well, you're muted.
Aye.
Engelborg?
Aye.
Arisman, I. Golding? LaFleur?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Topham?
Aye.
Right, so that carries unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Sarah.
you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Sarah.
Sarah. Sorry for the trouble.
Sarah, good luck.
Yes.
All right, so that moves us on to discussion of SBPF 87 through 105 Baxter Road, SE 48, 28, 24, the template maintenance. And I know we have Steve Cohen on, and I believe Dwight Dunk representing this.
Yeah, and some of it is an update from me.
Okay, so Jeff, would you like to start with an update then?
Sure, I'll kick it off, and then if Steve and Dwight have anything they'd like to add. So just an update from the last time we were talking about this. They had commenced the work to clean up the sand delivery area at 85 Baxter Road, to remove that debris and kind of bring that area into a greater level of compliance, as it was a concern for a source of potential debris and contamination that we kind of saw go through the geotubes and spread through other areas potentially as well. That's where all the sand is being delivered. And you guys had outlined kind of 3 steps for them as part of their template maintenance. And the first step was to regrade with existing material on that site. The second step was to complete the cleanup at the 85 Baxter Road area. And then the third activity that was authorized, and kind of what we're updating tonight, was then to be able to deliver the Pulpus Harbor dredge material to start their nourishment program back up again, but was limited to solely that specific material. So I'm here to report that we did inspections as we were supposed to between all those steps. We did inspect the 85 Baxter Road delivery area. We did get the report of the debris removed from that delivery area. And it was a good chunk of a roll-off dumpster, a lot of sonotubes and concrete and irrigation pipe and conduit and things that I think we expected. I think knowing that there's going to probably be some more material that frees from that bank over time, that it's getting monitored. But in our inspection, we felt that we didn't find any debris and that had been satisfactorily complete. So we authorized that third step, by your permission, to start delivering sand, which I don't believe has started yet, but probably will as soon as it can.
Thank you, Jeff. Dwight or Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Yep, Madam Chair, nothing else to add. Jeff summarized it very well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just one more thing I just was going to ask in regards to this. So I think as we're working as a group and working with SPPF on potential nourishment in the future and what that would look like, I think we need to probably do it as a separate agenda item. I don't think we need to carry it specifically to 28-24 anymore, but making sure we have that criteria in place to start working towards being able to maintain our proper nourishment volumes and keep that permit in compliance is something that we need to really start doing.
Yes, I agree with that, Jeff. And I think putting it on as a separate agenda item is the right way to go.
Yeah, I think if we just call it, just with your guys' permission, to something for discussion of nourishment material compatibility, and obviously there are other projects that may want to participate in that discussion too, but I think kind of ramping up how we're reviewing that and making sure that everyone understands the standards that are in place are going to be important to do, and we can apply that fairly and evenly for everybody and not just one project.
Yes.
I know there's concerns for everything from grain size to color to all kinds of things, but I think we just need to get some sort of guidance to people so they know what to do and how to do it correctly in kind of current conditions.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners on this? So Jeff, do we need to make a motion or anything, or are they just allowed to go forward?
Yeah, you guys made that motion at the April 30th meeting to allow them after inspection to do it. I just wanted to make you guys aware that that was going to be starting and that everything was inspected and in good order prior to that authorization that we just recently issued out. So unless Dwight or Steven know when they're going to physically start delivering sand, I don't think I have any more, or you guys have any additional action to take.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ian?
This is the sand from the Pulpus Harbor dredging, right?
Yes.
Correct. And only that sand.
Nothing else?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Okay. Seeing not, just expect them to start dumping that sand soon, I guess would be the message.
I would assume sooner than later.
Yes. All right. So we will move on then to discussion of SBPF 77 through 122 Baxter Road. And this is SE 481659 and SE 481602.
I'm going to kick this one off as well.
Yeah, why don't you kick this one off as well?
Sure. So what originally brought this up, and again, thanks to the Coastal Conservancy for kind of keeping it on our radar. And I know both Burton and Rick are here if they want to address this as well, is during the whole sand delivery shared area and problematic sediment making it onto the geotubes, there was also some concerns that some of that material and some of that debris had made it down to the projects being maintained to the south as well, just to the shared delivery point, and concerns of that there. It's obviously a permit that, as we discussed last time, is held by SPPF on behalf of some property owners, and the property owners have been running that project. I think Mr. Lager is on the call from NECA. We had him come on to talk about that project as well and kind of relay the concerns. But I think we were looking to kind of set that forward as well to make sure that those sand delivery points and those sand delivery theirs understood the requirements and the sensitive nature of that area and the collaboration needed between all parties involved for especially that shared delivery point. We had talked about that a bit last time, but wanted to get kind of everybody in touch just to understand how important that was. Did anyone else have anything they want to add to that? It's kind of a short. We talked about it a lot last time, so.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Okay, so I think we have, a few things going on here. We obviously have Netco, the contractor that did the dumping, but then we have kind of the compounded issue of SPPF being the permit holder for these projects. So I don't know. Again, we talked about a lot of this last time, so we don't need to repeat ourselves. But is there anything from those project representatives about this issue?
Madam Chairman, Dave Lager, President, Netco Construction Project Managers. As you're probably all aware, we've been working on Sconset Beach for about 20 years, maintaining various properties along the area of the concern. In that time frame, we have only used sand from two sources, Toscana and Holgate. We have never had a problem with their sand deliveries. The certificates regarding sand sieve analysis are, I believe, are on file with the Conservation Commission. Perhaps Jeff can confirm that. But as far as I am concerned, and as far as our superintendent who lives on Nantucket, Douglas, we've never had a problem with the sand delivery. I can't say that we didn't have some mixed in over time or some debris from either 85 or 87 that came down the hill did not get there, but my comment is we'll certainly be extremely diligent to make sure that none of the debris, if there is debris, makes it down the beach to the other properties.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Joe?
So I'm just kind of surprised that that no one was on site that from your company didn't say this isn't compatible sand. We need to stop this. I'm kind of surprised you've been on site. We're on island for 20 years, yet this is, I think, a third infraction with you within 3 years. There's just been a lot of missteps, mismanagement with your company regarding this street alone. I mean, I don't know where else you're working on Nantucket, but I'm really concerned with your company working on Nantucket. I think if you're going to go forward, you need to have someone there full time to watch what's going on and stop the moment that truck hits the site and say, this isn't sand we could take. Call up Toscana, call up Holgate and say, this, you're going to get us in trouble. Get us out of, get it out of here. I don't care what you do with it. Get us something that is bank compatible, beach sand compatible, whatever our guidelines are for that specific property. But I really feel like, the last project that you did unpermitted for putting, 4x4s all along the bank, it really is mind blowing that you thought that that was appropriate without coming and seeking our knowledge or our approval. I just really have a hard time where you've been on island for 20 years. The Conservation Commission's here. That we meet every 2 weeks. Where Jeff and Joanne's office is. I just am really having a hard time where you're like, yeah, it happened and we got the sand for Toscana. It's your company. You're the one that needs to take control of this. I know that SPPF did the permits. Listen, we've had that pound of flesh. Now it's yours. Well, you need to step up and say, we made a mistake and we're going to, from now on, follow what SPPF has gone through and sit down and say, we're going to sit down with Jamie Feely, Dwight Dunk, Steve Cohen. We're going to get their knowledge. We're going to control what we do because this has to stop because it's just been like footloose and fancy free where you guys don't think that this is really matters, but it does. I mean, I'm a native Nantucketer and I'm appalled that this keeps happening from your company. And I'm going to leave it at that. Everyone else can have a pound. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Ian?
Yes. So first of all, Jeff, what enforcement options are open to us under the circumstances? How many reports have they missed?
So,
what violations have they had?
so the issue that we have with this site in specific is these older permits don't have the same level of reporting requirements that current permits do. Their compatibility requirements are less. This originally started because the delivery area, for lack of better terms, the delivery area became such a hodgepodge of material and improper material that was getting moved around without any reporting on it, that all of the projects kind of got brought in because that delivery point was being shared during the same time windows. Right. So if I think the thought was, and what we were able to kind of see, kind of getting up and down the beach there, was material was getting moved throughout from 85 Baxter Road to the north and to the south during the kind of spring nourishment season. That over time, some of that material that we were seeing was getting put in both locations. So when we originally started down the path for issuing out enforcements or looking into enforcements for the improper material that we've just been dealing with for the past, feels like the past like 7 or 8 months, we kind of lumped in all of the projects using that common delivery site where the problem had occurred.
So, Madam Chair, if I may continue.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why we can't level the same level of enforcement and fine on Netco as we did on SPPF. So, because there's absolutely, I'm quite sure, correct me if I'm wrong, that in the original permitting, it didn't say that you could dump down the car and the kitchen sink and, polluted sand. So also, I might add, I'm very disturbed that in our meeting of December 11th, 2019, both Mr. Dunk and Mr. Cohen completely sidestepped SBPF's responsibility for Netco as the primary permit holder. But that's a separate issue. But I would like to focus on how we can charge Netco with a violation so that then going forward, we can change these conditions of, be more exacting on what they have to deliver.
All right, so I'll try to answer that as best I can. So a couple things, just for clarity for the record, Netco doesn't hold any permits with the town. The permits are held by SPPF and related to the property owner specific for 1602 and 1657. So 1659 covers the area from 77 to 122, most of which is not actively in that order of conditions. A lot of that area is in the geotubes. And then 65 to 67 Baxter Road are within SE 48 1602. So those permits are kind of separate. The second issue that we've had, and part of it in documenting all of this, is the core logs that are at the bottom of most of those are mostly uncovered and don't have material on top of them at this point. So that's gone away during the season and material needs to go back, but we don't have as solid of a record as we do related to kind of the enforcements we did for the geotubes for the area that's to the south.
So what's stopping Netco from delivering polluted sand and saying, oh, woe is me in the future?
Well, that's why we're here.
Well, but I seem to be going around in circles on this.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, Ashley, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
I think we've got to watch the back and forth because it's like kind of crazy for me to try and chair. But I think we definitely need to figure out the fining potential on this one. And then moving forward for Netco, they're going to have to follow whatever template sand protocol we come up with in the coming weeks. We can't give them the go ahead to recover those things given their track record, before we have, a clear plan on, what compatible fill means. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, I have a question for Jeff.
Yep.
So I understand that in these older 16 series permits, there wasn't the same level of compatibility discussion about the mitigation sand, but is there still that same general condition that it's 7 in the geotube project, but that requires clean fill, devoid of all those things that are listed, rubber.
Yeah, the short answer, that general condition is still the same.
Okay, so can we enforce on the basis of that?
So this is where it gets problematic, right? Is current conditions and what we have documented is those delivery sites where that material that was contaminated and moved through were being shared. And we were able to document the geotubes very easily because a lot of that material was on top of the geotubes, and we're able to go get that. At the same time, and I think we saw both groups working in the same time windows, material left that same area and went to the south. When we went back to go document, most of that material was already gone. So we don't have the same level of documentation for the area to the south as we did for the geotubes to the north.
Thank you, Jeff. Joe?
Through the chair, so to Jeff. So by meaning it's gone, it's into the ocean, it's gone, it's been washed away.
Correct. Those core logs are now pretty much uncovered at the moment for substantial stretches of the installations.
That's what I thought.
God, I'm almost feeling like with coastal projects, they need like all of them island wide. And I know this is like such a large ask, but they almost need staff to check them every time they're recovered with new material, to ensure that this isn't getting dumped and just lost to the ocean, because there is no way to track it down, which is kind of horrible.
May I comment, Madam Chairman?
Yes.
I've been listening to the comments. Thank you. I understand your concern. I get it. What I will just comment, the normal nourishment time frame is usually only from the April to June time frame. Most of the property owners who we deal with do not want to have sand put on in the fall or the winter because of the winter storm season, and that sand being donated to Mother Nature for basically sand compensation purposes. So from the point of view of when we deliver sand to cover any of our installations, it's usually in that 3-month time period. Secondly, at this point in time, could Jeff, could you tell me the specific instances where debris was discovered, found, or looked at on the area to the south of the geotubes?
Yeah, so when we did our inspections for some complaints and concerns that we had and went through the delivery area, I don't have the date of that inspection, but the dates that were there right off the top of my head. But late last year, we were able to recover and see debris, not only on the geotubes themselves, but also see significant debris in the delivery area, but then also finding debris not only in the project areas to the south, but in the route of travel to the south. And there was a pretty significant amount of debris. I mean, I think there's lots of photos. I'd be happy to send them along. They've been public record for quite some time, but I'll get those to everybody again.
Thank you,
I'll try to
Jeff.
get them
So
on my computer.
Joe's had a question, and then I'll go to Dwight and then Ian.
So maybe I misunderstood Mr. Larga, but he was saying his clients don't want sand at a certain time. I think if the sand is gone and the template and the jute tubes are exposed, then he needs to put back more sand because that goes in the littoral system and that feeds, like, it's completely defeating. Like, The clients don't control what's going on. It's what the beach needs, what the storm needs. I mean, it's not up to his clients to tell us, well, we don't want to put sand there then. Well, it's like, no, those are exposed. I mean, I feel like he's working under a completely different set of rules. And I feel like we put Mr. Duncan, Mr. Cohen, and the group through, a beatings on the street. And he's coming here and saying, well, we don't want to do it then. And my understanding is that the moment that those tubes are exposed, they have to bring sand and provide that so it goes in the littoral system. I mean, this is why we're here, is to control and what happens to these type of coastal projects like this. So I'm a little confused. Maybe I misunderstood him, but I'm kind of shocked with that comment if that's truly what he said, because that's not the way it works. So thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Chairman, can I respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say something too. Joe, the quar rolls are a little different just in that they are designed for major storms to actually break open and let sand enter the system. So it is like a little bit different than the harder geotubes, but at the same time, it's not a choice when they should deliver sand.
Yeah, plus the photographs I've seen, that the bags haven't opened. They're still, solid. So maybe I'm looking at a different photograph, or maybe I have to go on a different site, but it seems like if it did break open, that's great, but he's asking to bring more sand. So I'm just kind of confused if the bag isn't opening, it's everything's structured based on what I've seen in the photographs, then if they're going to be not break apart, then he needs to be finding sand immediately. Sorry, maybe I'm missing a step here, but I just feel like they can't be exploded, because then you're going to have wave action that's going to accelerate and, have bigger refraction going off. So going to cause damage further down the shoreline.
Yeah.
May I respond, Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, the permit for this goes back to when Peggy Fantozzi and Dirk were in the commission. And the basis of the permits back at that time, which is 15, 20 years ago now, was based on that the sand nourishment would be equal to the amount of average annual erosion that would occur on the coastal bank. And that average annual erosion would be both based on sand cover as well as the envelopes. These are not tubes. These are not quar fiber rolls. These are actually quar envelopes that are filled with sand. And that's been the basis of the permit, or basis of the order of conditions, since the beginning of this work, which was basically in 2001, 2002. So a little misunderstanding, I think, on exactly what is the basis of the permit. So as I understand it, and Jeff, please correct me if I'm wrong, the amount of sand that the owners are required to put is equal to the average rate of erosion of the coastal bank as established by the Coastal Zone Management Council. So, Mr. Topin, I understand where you're coming from, but, at the same time, the sand right now, for whatever it's worth, is up to $104 per cubic yard on the island. From both Toscana and Holgate. So obviously, yes, many of them have the resources, but they're still very concerned about price. And I'm still obligated to follow, I can't do work that they do not approve me to do.
Thank you.
So
Jeff?
I'll just clarify that they're required at a minimum to place 5,000 cubic yards per year.
Not per property, but that's for an entire length of the area, right? And that 5,000 yards, is that the geotubes, or is that the area to the south of the geotubes?
That is specifically from SE 48 1659.
And Dwight had a question, and then I think Ian, and then Seth.
Yes, I was just going to comment. There was a question about the sand deliveries that occurred that were noticed to Jeff. And I don't recall all of the dates, but I recall in June of 2019, there was a report of material being delivered. And I know Jeff met out there with Jamie for the geotube project for the template. There had been no sand deliveries, no material deliveries. after February 09, and those did not resume again until February 19, and then those resumed again in the autumn of 2019. So that was one of the dates that material had been delivered. I don't know if Jeff had other reports.
I have to pull those back out.
Yep.
Then I think, Ian, you had your hand up, and then to Seth. Oh, you're muted.
I want to read into the record because it's pertinent.
I didn't hear that, Ian.
I said, I want to read into the record because it's pertinent. Part of the minutes from December 11th, and specifically the recordings of that meeting on December 11th, 2019. So at 17 minutes and 52 seconds into the meeting, I asked, from the minutes, it says Golding wants to establish whether or not SBPF accepts responsibility for the material on the template, no matter how it got there. Mr. Cohen answers between 18 minutes, 23 seconds and 18 minutes, 47 seconds. So we do not, SBPF does not dispute that it is possible that some of the debris within the site is deposited through the sand, but we think there is also other sources for it, either from the bluff itself or from other sites or from other contractors. Golding at 20 minutes and 12 seconds asks, I just want to establish that you do accept that you are responsible for what is on the template. Mr. Dunk answers 22 minutes, 44 seconds through 23 minutes, 38 seconds. Back in June, Jeff met out there with Mr. Feely, and there was a pile of dirt sand that had debris in it that was deposited by another contractor for another project. Last week, the same thing happened. When they went out and looked, there was a pile there at the 87-85 site, collection location, before it's pushed down, that was deposited by another contractor for use at another project. Now that all goes down the same ramp. And then third is the material that can come out of the recycled sand that SBPF uses. So we acknowledge that there are those three sources. And with that, and then he goes on to another subject. And then Mr. Dunk says between 34 minutes and 52 seconds and 35 minutes and 18 seconds, of the three potential sources, the two that SBPF has some control over are addressed. The third one, of other contractors using that publicly available site, leaves that as a potential source. So we're trying to address the two items that SBPF can address. So my question, well, first of all, my observation would be that it would appear to implicate Netco in depositing polluted sand. And my second question is, how do Mr. Dunk and Mr. Cohen, how come they didn't say right that they were the primary permit holders and that Netco was, responsible to them?
Steve?
Okay, I'm going to try to say this as clearly as possible. First of all, we didn't know at the time that the permits had been issued in SBPF's name. That was something that was checked later. But it doesn't matter at all, 0% whose name is on the permit. That is just who applies for the permit and who the permit is issued to. The legally responsible party is the person who owns the real estate. And the person who owns the real estate engages with a contractor to do the work for them. Those are the parties that are responsible. The commission has jurisdiction over the property owner, and the property owner has a contractual relationship with the contractor. SBPF only facilitated getting these permits for these homeowners, but it is not the homeowner and it is not engaged in these activities at all. SBPF has no contractual relationship with Netco and does not supervise or otherwise manage this project. In the Geotubes project, SBPF essentially acts as the contractor and is the responsible party because it has made itself so. But in the 30 years before that, that was not the case. SPPF was only an organizing entity. So this concept of a primary permit holder is an entire fallacy and misconstruing of the facts. The property owner is the permit holder, not the name on the permit, in the same way that permits that are issued to Ian Golding are not Ian Golding's responsibility after he has sold the house and someone else is now the owner of the house. That permit is always issued in the name of the person who applied for it. But that doesn't matter. Okay, so I want to be very clear that SPPF is not shirking any of its responsibilities here. SPPF is only saying that it is neither the property owner nor the contractor in this situation and has no relationship with Netco here. However, that is not the case in the geotubes, where SPPF essentially is the contractor and the organizing entity and takes responsibility for the project on behalf of the town and the property owners through the agreements that SPPF has entered into those. So I hope that we can stop exploring this over and over and frankly besmirching SPPF and accusing me and Dwight of misleading the commission, which I find highly, highly offensive. Thank you.
So Steve, I'm wondering if you've seen some of the information submitted to our packet, because it does, share a license agreement between SPPF and the town for this area. Pretty much suggesting that you do have some responsibility there. And I realize that you and Mr. Dunk maybe weren't part of SPPF at that time, but doing the research into the history of the organization and making sure you didn't have any outstanding permits or licenses to deal with, I think is important. And it does appear in this case that SPPF does have licenses and permits that they are responsible for in this area. And again, that's part of our packet that all of us have seen. So I think that that's kind of difficult to ignore at this point. Seth, if you've had a question for a while.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a point to say on what is being discussed right now, but before I get to that, I want to go back to what Mr. Lager said regarding the price of sand. I think that is completely irrelevant. If the permit that's issued says that they must provide the mitigation sand 5,000 cubic yards minimum per year, if they don't do that, they're not in compliance with the permit. So it's expensive. I get it. These projects are expensive, but that is completely outside of our control. Our control is to protect the resource area. And if the applicant has agreed to conditions, if it's expensive, that's their responsibility. And then second, I have a question in relation to that for Jeff. I'm assuming the answer is no, given the age of this permit, but is there a seasonality of mitigation sand requirement? Are they required to deliver within a specific date window, or is it any time throughout the year?
Jeff?
Yeah, so I can actually answer that. The only time of year restriction for delivery is related to April 15th through Labor Day for potential nesting shorebirds. And that can be overcome with written permission or having a qualified biologist being able to certify that there's not protected species or escort through. So kind of those standard conditions, but that's the only time of year restriction on that permit.
If I just may respond quickly, it sounds like the sand delivery as it's happening now is happening between April and June. And we should definitely check the history to see if that shorebird biologist has been in place for that, to make sure that they're complying with that as well.
Thank you, Seth. Joe, and then to Ian.
Seth, thank you. I just took the words out of my mouth. The other part of this is we didn't apply for the tubes. We didn't apply for the geotubes. We didn't apply for the dupe tubes. We didn't apply for it. His client came to us. They asked for our permission. We gave it. We told them the standards that they would have to meet. They haven't met it. And it's not up to them to say that, yeah, we're not up to going to do that this year. It's $100 per yard. That's not a concern. You came to us and you're here now because you have an open permit that you are trying to work on. So you know you need to do something, but you're in violation. So, and excuse me, Ian, but I'm happy with SPPF's response to what they've done to what's going on from Netco. I feel like they really have, they just don't understand what's going on in Nantucket. So either they need to sit down with Jeff for a couple of hours or Joanne and say, what are we doing wrong? How do we solve this? Because I always feel like that, you know, Steve Cohen has his hat in his hand. And I don't feel like that Netco is feeling any of this. And they just feel like, well, we just don't want to do that. That's really discouraging and infuriating to me. I'm really getting mad at that. That is what is going on. And that's the stance I take. So that's why I agree with what Seth said, because it's true. I'm sorry that's $100 a yard or whatever it is. And it's only going to go up. So it's not going to get better. But it is what it is. You came to us, you asked for this. If you don't want to pay for it, then I guess you have to say, you know, you're going to go into failure criteria and you're going to have to remove it. And that's where I think there's going to be some more damage to the beach, sadly, but that's your other option. I think if you don't step up and you're not in the forefront of this and you're not getting ahead of these problems and you're not watching what's going on or what's going on in the bluff, you're going to have to remove it because we're going to say like you're in violation and that's coming out. So that's my stance. And I'm speaking on my own behalf, but I don't know what anyone else thinks, but thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Ian?
Well, Joe, I agree with you. You know, really? I do. And, you know, so I would ask Jeff to ask town council to give an opinion on Mr. Cohen's response. And because I respectfully disagree with him. And, but it absolutely is ultimately a question of holding Netco responsible for its behavior. And, but I don't like this idea of it sort of floating off, you know, in the intertidal zone of responsibility here, as it were. And thank you.
Thank you. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I would also like to say that I disagree with Mr. Cohen's position that they haven't, well, I agree that they haven't been involved in the history of this project past the permitting, but I disagree with the fact that they're not responsible. I'm not a lawyer, but it's my understanding that both the property owner and the permit holder are liable for the conditions of the permit. I'd also like to note that I'm not sure if this predates the project we're referencing or not, but between 2000 and 2006, SBPF has a documented history of having Netco as an independent contractor that might predate what we're talking about here. But I just would like to say that there has been some history between that SBPF as an organization and Netco. It might not be relevant to this particular discussion. And I'm not saying SPPF is necessarily at fault here, but it's my understanding that even if they didn't oversee this project, maybe they should have kept a closer eye on it as the permit holder.
I'd like to respond if I could, Madam Chairman.
Okay, so
let me use Steve.
Mr. Lager, 1 second, because Maureen actually had her hand up first and has been waiting. Maureen, do you have a question that might be relevant to Mr. Lager that he might need to answer as well?
Well, my question goes to who is responsible here? And we are spending a lot of time talking about Netco, which I think we should, but I also disagree with Mr. Cohen and agree with Ian and others who have said this, that SBPF as the applicant and also in the license agreement that received from the town, clearly SBF is the moving party and they're responsible for everything. None of these applications were driven by the landowners. The landowners have never been, been brought to bear on this. The landowners, I believe, have relied upon SBPF's representation of them. And also Netco, I believe, is an agent of SBPF. And when your agent does not do what they're supposed to do, it's your duty as the person who employed that agent to make sure they do that right. So if they screw up and you don't supervise them, then you are equally at fault. And I think here that we should not just focus on Netco. I think we need to be very clear with Mr. Cohen and Mr. Dunk that SBPF has been the leading party, the known party. They're the only party to the license agreement. And the license agreement recites very broad language as to their abilities and their powers, and none of it is dependent upon the property owners. So I think the position that the applicant is somehow a mere shell or non-entity in this, I do not agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. All right, Mr. Lager, you're up.
I have to say, I'm going to use Steve Cohen's words. Let me be very clear about this. This history of going back, and I have to say I'm angry at a lot of your comments that you're making because I think they're grossly unfair. Let me put it as straight as I possibly can. Sconset Beach Preservation Fund has been around since the late 1990s. Epsilon has been also involved in the permitting process since the late 1990s. You have different people involved now than were involved earlier in the process. Sconset Beach Preservation Fund was the permitting person for all of the properties on Baxter Road. There is no question about that. They were represented by Epsilon. They were represented by different attorneys in different points in time. So to claim that the property owners relied without any question upon Sconset Beach Preservation Funds, they made contributions to Sconset Beach Preservation Fund to hire the attorneys and the permitting people to do that work. Secondly, as to our role in all of this, yes, we are an agent of the property owners, but we're also an agent of Sconset Beach Preservation Fund. I have to confess, I do not remember the 5,000 cubic yard requirement that Jeff just brought up. But if that's the case, we'll certainly go back out there and tell all the property owners to put 5,000 cubic yards out there. Third, there have been multiple delivery sources of sand. I think it is grossly unfair for any of you to suggest in any way, shape, or form that Netco is totally responsible for the problems out there. The solution of all of this is that we pick one delivery source of sand that the owners to the south of the geotubes use and that the geotube people use, that the Sconset Beach uses to cover the geotubes. It is, I think you're going far too far in your criticism of the behavior out there, except maybe for the 5,000 cubic yards. Helmut Weimar, as you're probably aware, Jeff, was actively involved before Josh got involved in the whole project. And there was a lot of debate on developing, with Epsilon, developing the amount of sand that has been delivered there, including filling the core envelopes and covering it. In all cases, the quantity of sand put out there was in excess of 5,000 cubic yards. If you would like to go back and document that, we certainly can, because the delivery slips from Toscana and Holgate are very good. I also think that by criticizing the sand, you're also criticizing Holgate and Toscana at the same time. I don't think anybody sits out there on any part of the island and watches every single ton of sand that's delivered. If you want that to happen, then that's going to have to be an entirely separate decision that's put into your order of conditions somewhere. Right now, that's not required. But I would say just to summarize, a single source of sand delivery is basically the first thing to eliminate any who did it. And the second thing to get at is that, yes, Sconset Beach Preservation Fund has been the agent of all the property owners over time. There's no question about that. And I hope I've made myself very clear. Steve, you can say whatever you want legally, because I know that's what you're going to say. But the issue is, from my vantage point of having been involved in it far longer than anybody else that I'm looking at in this picture here, is that Sconset Beach was the permitting person.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lager. I want to say to you that this is your first meeting being present for this. So we're absolutely not saying that all of the contaminated material that's gone on the bluff is Netco's fault. We spent 6 months this winter, speaking with SPPF, dealing with their sand sources. So we've gone out and identified Holgates and Toscana. Like we've talked about all this, and you just weren't present for kind of their roasting on this topic. But they certainly have, we've had that discussion with them for sure. So I'm sorry that you feel like all the pressure's just on you. We're just having you here for your part in this last June. Joe, you had your hand up.
Everybody's pointing at different people. You got to have a single source of responsibility. And Madam Chairman, sorry to interrupt. One source of sand has got to be it. So if you're delivering sand today from the Pulpus Harbor, then we should be using the same sand rather than bringing in Holgate or Toscana sand, which I feel is perfectly good. The Pulpus Harbor sand is coming there for one reason and one reason only. Sconset Beach bid on it and got a cheaper price than what you can get at it from Holgate and Toscana at this point, because most of the sand is being barged anyhow.
I know, Mr. Lager. And we've gone through that. So we will get to the bottom of the sand sourcing and all of that. It's on our agenda. Joe?
So when I give a set of architectural plans and I give them to the builder, there's sizes of beams and joists and all that fun stuff. But I've gone and gotten the permit. But I don't necessarily always follow through a project. I will on my own go by and maybe do an inspection and make sure it's rough framed. But at the same time, I have shown up at one site and I was like, what is this? This was a change. Oh, we made this in the field. And it came back to bite the contractor and the homeowner $12,000 because they had changed something without doing the permits. So this is where I kind of have a little bit of space and forgiveness for SPPF, excuse me. But I feel like they've done the permit to help facilitate so Netco could get on the site for the owners, et cetera. But at the same time, yeah, maybe they should have taken a peek at when they were doing some work. But at the same time, they just did the permitting. And I think there is a kind of a Heisman arm length distance that they had. And I don't hold them to the same regard that I think Netco, maybe legally there's something challenging there that could win. But at the same time, I feel like in my professional opinion, when I give a set of plans to the builder, that's the house that needs to be built. That's what the HCC has approved. That's what the building department's approved. That's where the inspector is going to go and approve. So I don't see the Concom steps as being any different. And I say this with all respect to my fellow commissioners, but this is kind of my perspective where if someone doesn't do what they're supposed to do, and well, we didn't know that we were supposed to have 5,000 cubic yards per year. Well, you should every time the foreman goes up the site, he should have the approval in front of him and make sure that every step, how many we have. I mean, I know that, the GeoTubes has an extensive, probably 4 pages of every box they have to tick. And I feel like if someone's coming to a job site, it's like, well, I don't need the plans. I'm going up there. I'm going to Sconset. Well, no, we've told them this is your path. This is what you need to follow. And these need to be in rules and regs you need to follow. But to say like, I'm going to leave the office and I don't remember what this were, that's insulting to us as a board, because he should know exactly what's going on. Or to even just step before the meeting and say, well, I read this and yeah, I'm sorry. We didn't realize we had to do 5,000 yards per year. And I'm sorry, but that's not the case. He's still looking over the review and finding that he's made more mistakes. This is where I'm having a problem. And you can get as mad as you want, Mr. Lager, but I think it's more infuriating to what you're doing to Nantucket and the coastal bank and the littoral system. I mean, there's a whole system we've been trying to fight with. And we've, like Ashley said, it's been 6 months of going back and forth in meetings and, taking out of time out of our day and away from our families to make sure this is done right. So I'm a little frustrated that you show up and you're not prepared or know really what your site is required to do. So
What
don't
is
get
the
frustrated
quantity
enough.
of the
No,
contaminated
no,
material?
guys, no. The back.
No, this is ridiculous.
No, Mr. Logger, I'm sorry. That's not the way our procedure works. You
I
can't
apologize.
interrupt even if you're upset. But again, realize that we've been going through this for months and months now. Netco was not a participant. So now you're all of a sudden in this. And I think we need to take some deep breaths and maybe say, okay, I need to get some information and come back to the commission in 2 weeks when I really feel like I know what's going on. But I think we do need to stop the personal attacks back and forth because we don't know some of the background with this one. You know, we need to focus on the wetland resource areas and how to make this better. And it sounds like in this case, unfortunately, we might not have the documentation to nail Netco with this. Jeff said the sediment has moved into the littoral system. I mean, that stinks for us, but it might be what it is. And again, I think we need to kind of stop personally attacking different groups and trying to get to like the root of this, you know, like who has the permits, you know, who is doing the work, how can we make this better going forward? If we can fine, let's do it. But I think this needs to be a more productive discussion than like an angry discussion that's kind of started here. Steve had his hand up for a while.
So, you know, I think part of what we're dealing with here is that there, some of the sand that was put over that was done through Netco was not done in a supervised way. And I'm not saying that it should have been, but you know, he didn't even know that this sand might have had these contaminants in it in terms of the extra silt or cement pieces or whatever. And I think that, you know, to quote my friend Ernie Steinauer, you know, the Concom's job is not to punish people. The Concom's job is to, you know, make them clean up their messes and make them do it right in the future. And so, you know, SBPF is 100% on board with all of the work that was done to make sure that all the contamination and contaminants and debris was removed, and is 100% on board with working with the commission and working with Netco to make sure that everything going forward is done to the highest and best standards that we can work with. I know the commission earlier in the meeting put on its agenda to work on coming up with its own standards, which, you know, potentially Jeff could advise you as to whether or not those would exceed the permits that are in place, or whether they could be done as your regulations so that they apply to everybody. I don't want to step on his toes on that, but you know, potentially you could require everybody to operate under new protocols that would be have the right kind of oversight and the right kind of testing, and hopefully not too much you know, staff time investment so much as just checking in. But I think that the ability to clean up the site has been done to the maximum extent, and the ability to do the right thing going forward, at least on for the people I can speak for, is 100% there. So, you know, hopefully we can end at least on that sentiment of moving forward in the right direction and making sure that there's nothing remaining that needs to be done in terms of cleanup. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Jeff, you had your hand up at one point, and then I'll go to you, Burton.
I did. I think from the end of the day, and I appreciate the discussion that everyone's having, it's from a staff level.
Something is wrong with your mic.
Is that better? Or is it just my connection?
I can't tell if it's your connection. It's like something fuzzy in the mic.
I wonder if it's still really bad.
Yeah.
All right, why don't you move on to somebody else, and I'll see if I can fix that.
Okay, so we'll go to Burton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. You know, I want to take us back to that day in June when I brought the samples of sand to the board, and there was, I don't know if you remember, it wasn't just dirty sand, it wasn't just silty sand. There was wire in the sand. There was plastic. There was construction debris. It was horrible. And I'm a citizen, I don't know if it was Netco, who it was. I followed this with Jeff, and Jeff has explained to me the process and how it was for the installations to the south. That's fine. Another point I just want to bring up is it wasn't a Toscana or a Holgate's truck that delivered that. It was Valero's. Now, I don't know if they're subcontracting, And there were other trucks too that had names on the sides of them that were delivering sand, whether they're subcontractors. I don't know how that works either, but just follow a chain of custody of the material. It's not just Toscana and Holgate. There are many subcontracts that are involved in the hauling. So I want to make that point clear, and I want that on the record. As you guys, as the board knows, we documented pretty heavily the extent to the soil that was dropped off the edge in those deliveries in June. So I really think that all the parties that are involved really need to go back and look at that, especially the owner of NECO really needs to go back and look and see what we're talking about, because it's not just some sand. It was egregious, what happened. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Jeff, do you want to give it another go?
Is that any better?
No.
Awesome. All right. Well, let me just bail out. I'll log back in and hope that that's good. So just keep going. I'll be right back. Go ahead.
Rick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just an observation on the whole discussion this evening and a couple of weeks ago. I find it, first of all, I think Mr. Lager, I appreciate his refreshing approach. And I mean that in a reasonably good way. I think there's a easy way to, number one, move forward. So both major parties seem to agree that new standards should work for everybody. And I think it's in everybody's interest, NETCO's, SBPF's, the commissions, and the property owners, to the extent they're involved or not, to just get a good, clear record of each delivery that was made during the past 9 months or some period, and the chain of custody, and just get that all on the record once and for all, so we don't have to speculate about it. And then it is what it is. If that makes sense to you, I think that would be helpful. I think the staff could have asked for information that would have brought all of that forward months ago. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen. And I think it's in everybody's interest to have that happen. SPPF submits all the tickets in the world, and I think we just need to trace back anybody else delivering sand as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I definitely agree with your point that we should be getting tickets for all coastal projects, the sand deliveries, where they've been coming from, and the contractors involved, for sure. Jeff, are we going to try again?
Is that any better?
Yes.
All right. I must have had a bad connection. No, I was just going to say is, I mean, from our end, and I tend to agree with a lot of the comments that have been going on, is I just want to get us to a point where we have a level playing field for everybody, and we can end finger pointing, and we just know, and that there's coordinated efforts going on, especially through shared areas. That's, kind of the root of some of the problem here, and knowing when it's going on and who to contact and who's responsible and who's organizationally responsible, and what the hierarchy is for all of these sites that are shared, and knowing when things are going on, because we're relying a little bit upon kind of random inspections. We get a lot of citizen reports. I mean, this isn't the only project that we are monitoring for permit conditions. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we've had 3,306 notices of intent on Nantucket, and all of those have had permits to some degree at some point that we're all kind of responsible for. So it just needs to be better organized and better controlled. And I totally agree with Mr. Lager to some sense, where if you could, in an ideal world, all come from the same sand source that was approved and monitored, and you knew where it was going from, that'd be awesome. But I don't think that's realistic especially for the quantity of material that you're talking about. Just for the geotubes, where you're looking at, 22 cubic yards per foot right now on the existing structure. It's a lot of material. So it's things where I think it's a good chance for, for the applicants and permitting bodies to help bring that group together through SPPF and through the commission and through staff to kind of get it back on track and running in a positive direction together. I mean, I think the last couple months and the last few weeks, especially, they've stepped up on the geotubes and cleaned up the delivery area and been working towards it. And it's really at a good point now to kind of start anew and say, this is what's expected. If you want to use these public sites, this is the level of detail that's required for you to do and manage. And this is the information that you have to provide. So we don't have situations where, well, our sand came in February and their sand came in April, we think, and it's them and it's them and it's them. We'll know for sure right before we even start, not trying to play catch up. And that's what's frustrating from our end is it's difficult to play catch up, and permits that are older have different conditions and different requirements. Not everyone had to keep certain records for certain things in some spots and some do. That it needs to be a fair and even playing field for everybody with clear expectations going forward. That would be our kind of request from an administrative end.
Thank you, Jeff.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Any other thoughts or comments from commissioners? Okay. So Jeff, where should we leave this one?
Well, I honestly think it falls a little bit within what we talked about earlier in kind of working towards some sort of standard for nourishment projects that's just not clear right now, or it's dependent upon everyone's order of conditions that are all over the map, and some are very old and some are new, and some are very good and some are not as good. So I think it's really kind of buckling down and get that. And honestly, I don't want to, steal Steven's thunder from this one, which is a rare occasion for me. But I tend to agree that it's not as simple as an order of conditions. I actually believe that it's going to take some level of regulatory change to set that standard so it's clear and even, and set some sort of applicability to catch up the older permits to how we're reviewing it and using kind of current information. So I think that's kind of the challenge in front of us, is to get that done in an expeditious manner. It's obviously going to take George's involvement too. So
yes, I agree. We need
never the best. Oh, sorry.
No, we definitely need George, and then this sand as a discussion item for protocols moving forward.
Yeah.
Seth?
Thank you. I agree with that. We need the plan and the regulatory update moving forward. Just one thing on the logistical side. I don't know if the contractor has any additional sand deliveries scheduled upcoming soon before this update potentially happens. But if so, is there any additional level of oversight that we could have so to ensure that they're delivering clean sand there?
Jeff?
So yeah, so to answer that question, I mean, they're still beholden to the conditions in their permit. So they still have to meet the requirements of 1659 and 1602. I think if you're giving out clear instructions that you're expecting those permit conditions to be, held to the letter without exception, and if they need, guidance and oversight to do that, I think we're happy to help. But I think setting those expectations to be clear, to say whether you were the responsible party or not for material that shouldn't have been there getting there, the expectation is that can't happen ever again, or the commission's going to be taking more extreme steps than what they currently are. And I think that's, to me, I think the message to to get across because they obviously still have to maintain the structures and be in compliance with their permits, even if we're trying to play catch up with regulations.
Thank you, Jeff. And Mr. Lager, do you have sand deliveries that you need to schedule soon?
We have one project for Josh Posner that he's requested to have his core envelopes repaired and sand covered. We were starting on that this week. The sand that is being provided is the same, is up to Josh to provide that sand. We're not providing that sand. I would have to talk to Josh to see about that. We also have one other project next door, the Darby residents, that they want their work, they want their core envelopes repaired. So those are the two current projects that are anywhere close. We haven't done any work on Sconset Beach since last October or November. This will be the first time since then.
Thank you. Ian?
Well, we have a moratorium on sand being delivered there and I see no reason why we should make an exception for Netco. And Mr. Lager, in answer to you saying you've been involved longer than anybody else, actually you haven't. Because I remember when Helmut Weimar came to the island and pitched my parents because we lived in Baxter Road. So, but I hope you don't go away from this meeting feeling as angry as you were during the meeting, because I don't think that's any of our intention to have you leave at that level. We really are looking for pragmatic solutions here.
Thank you. I was thinking I would have to get my lawyer on board next time, which I don't want to do. I appreciate your comment, Mr. Golding.
Thank you.
Burton, you had a comment or question?
Quick comment, Madam Chair. Just wonder if there was any sand deliveries. I would like to have a biologist for birds. There are some nesting plovers down the way. I don't know, Jeff might know if they're close enough to require a biologist, but there are some in Quignet that are nesting right now, not too far away. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
So right now I'd have to measure and get some hatch dates. I know the closest one for them being on the nest is probably far enough away that there wouldn't be a vehicle restriction in that area. But once they hatch, the federal guidelines require a 1,000-yard buffer to unfledged piping plover chicks. So that may impact that area. 1,000 yards is pretty huge. So that can be difficult to overcome, but we'll have to get an update. That nest is up on property that Mass Audubon monitors, so we can get that. And while I have the floor, if I could, Madam Chair, we have one public comment on this on the YouTube, if you would like it.
Yep, let's take it.
Sure. So it's from Deanne Atherton, and it just says, if SPPF, the licensee, is not going to take responsibility for the soft installation south of the geotubes, the town, which is the licensor, should be notified by the commission. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have to agree, since the town is a license holder on these properties, that they probably should, or granted a license, excuse me, they probably should be brought up to date on what's going on. Rick?
If I might, just one kind of follow-up. I would hope we don't leave this meeting without having at least some minimal specific expectations. And I would just suggest to you, going forward is one thing that's going to be perhaps a little more subjective and difficult and involves the commissions. But going back over the past 18 months, let's say, just have a easy Excel spreadsheet of every delivery made by Netco or SPPF by date. And then you can start to fill it out from there. And that can't be that difficult. And so I think it would be helpful for everybody to get that available to the commissioners and the public, and Netco and SPPF can see each other's deliveries and we can follow up from there. But if you don't ask for it specifically, somehow it never occurs.
Thank you, Rick. Any thoughts on that from commissioners, or any other thoughts or comments? Steve?
Sorry, I know we're at the end, but I actually really have to go. So I just wanted to thank everybody and I'm going to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Maureen, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think that Rick's idea is a very good one. We're short of you know, facts that are not in somehow in some dispute. And if we have the facts of these deliveries and the dates and all of that, and who was, what entities were involved, that gives us a place to start. And I want to repeat what I said earlier. I still don't think we have it clear that who, you know, there's SBPF's role vis-a-vis Netco or any other contractor they use. I think we need to have that clarified, and maybe by that George should look into this, because it's something I know that he's aware of and that has been an issue. And I would like to get that nailed, because I really think that this is not, you know, there's, excuse me, there's, you know, finger pointing is really pointless. And I think we need to determine who's the ultimate responsible person, who then, you know, needs to be telling its agents down the road what they should be doing. And so it can't be, you know, I don't know, they just told me to bring sand, or I don't know, I just hired somebody and they're going to do the right thing. And I don't know, you know, I'm not the property owner, so I'm only the applicant. And so I don't know. So I really want an end to that. And I think George can provide that for us. So I would strongly, I think we should go to him and get that nailed down, because that's at the bottom of all this, I think.
Thank you, Maureen.
George?
He's town council. So, and Maureen, I agree. I think next time this discussion is up, we should have George on with us probably. And if that's not possible, he can give us a written statement ahead of time or something along those lines. Joe?
Thank you.
I agree with Maureen. But secondly, I understand Rick's need for the Excel spreadsheet, but I really like to see the copy, the handwritten from the truck driver. It just, for me, that is like proof that this is what the truck driver did. This is what was billed. So I prefer that. I don't mind if his Excel spreadsheet came along with it, but I just think we're getting 100 tickets. I'd rather see that than an Excel spreadsheet personally. I think that works better for me in the way I view this information. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Ian?
Well, it's occurred to me that we've only been getting the tickets that SPPF is arguing they're responsible for, so that there will be no Netco tickets in there. I don't know if Mr. Logger can advise us otherwise or could provide us with those.
I can provide tickets from both Toscana and Holgate, because those are the only people we've used for sand supply. We don't use Reese. We don't use anybody else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That would be great if you could submit those to Jeff.
If someone sends tickets in, I think if it's helpful, we can find somebody. We're having some summer staff start. We may be able to tap them into service to compile it into a master spreadsheet, and then we can get both versions with just the tickets and the spreadsheet going forward.
The interns will love it.
Gotta have rainy day activities for the kids sometimes, you know?
Mr. Logger, did you have a comment?
One question, we get invoices from Toscana and generally it just gives a date and quantity delivered. I've never received an actual delivery slip with a signed trucker on it from Toscana, but I'll certainly see what I can get.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments from commissioners? Okay. Well, I think we're on a better track now, hopefully getting the delivery tickets or delivery information that's available submitted to try and track this down. And then I guess we'll continue with a discussion about sand delivery in general and our standards for beach compatibility, et cetera. Is that correct? Or Jeff, should we hold this agenda item over as well so that George can weigh in on some of it?
I think if we're looking for town council opinion, we can certainly kind of keep it active. And then we can have a check-in prior to the meeting, Madam Chair. And if we want to adjust the title of the agenda item, we certainly can.
Okay. That sounds good to me if all the other commissioners are in agreement. Ian?
Yes, I am in agreement, Madam Chair, but I feel going forward that sort of mirroring what Joe has been saying, that we should hold NETCO to the same levels of supervision that we're holding SBPF to. So in terms of the deliveries that Mr. Logger has mentioned, I feel that we should have if we're allowing them, that we should have the same protocols so that every delivery is examined and so that we don't have any further issues of contamination going forward. I don't know what my fellow commissioners feel. And I'm sorry, Mr. Logger, that you're at the tail end of this very long process.
Yeah, Ian, I agree. I think it would be good the same way we've had SBPF have a documented contractor like on site when all of this stuff is going on. I think we should have the same with NETCO, where there is a contact person who's going to be on site for the delivery, all the work, keeping track of all of that. So I'm in agreement with you, Ian. Jeff and then Joe.
I'll be fair in saying I would really appreciate that for all sites, not just this one or these two. There's a lot of sand that gets moved around, and knowing what it is and whether it's, we require start work forms for projects when they're kicking off, but maybe adopting that requirement for nourishment products where they at least have to provide estimated dates of work and who to call and who's going to be on site just for us. I mean, I know it seems like more paperwork, but if we get a call to the office or someone calls and has a question about an area, we know right where to go. And we're not spending a month just trying to figure out who's mucking around, because there's a lot of different names on trucks that drop off sand in spots, and they're very rarely connected to the work that's going on. So outside of delivering sand. So it would be nice to have a better mechanism to deal with that.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff. Joe?
I agree with what you both have said, Ashley and Ian, and even what Jeff just said. I do think we need to get every tag, every ticket for every project to go forward. So, like Miss Larga is like, well, we got it from here. Well, there's such and such a truck and such a driver. Go to have a conversation with, or I have Toscana, which I know they're very good about having team meetings and bringing everyone together to say this has got to stop. So I think that going forward, we'll educate from, the operator all the way down to the person working on the beach with a shovel in hand. So I just think that we need to just start that right away so that we don't have these meetings and we're not, unfortunately having Mr. Larga here and, facing the music. So I don't think he'd want to do this again, but I think that we just need to set some standards and be moving forward with this. So thank you.
We do that all the time off at Nantucket. We work all the way from Rhode Island to Maine, and a lot of commissions do require individual delivery slips, and it's not an unusual requirement. It's actually fairly usual. The usual question comes in, though, is the inspection of the material. And who do we have, an independent inspector, or are you going to trust contractors to do their own inspection? But that's a topic for probably another day.
Thank you. I know it's depended with SBPF. They have a designated contractor on record there. And then in some cases, we've asked that staff as well be there to monitor when certain things are going on. So I think it's a little bit of a combination depending on what exactly is taking place on a site. So, all right. Are there any final questions or comments on this before we move it on for 2 weeks? Okay, seeing not, we will move on in the agenda. Thank you, Mr. Logger, for coming, and Dwight for staying on. I appreciate that.
Thank you, everyone. Talk to you whenever the next time is. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Welcome, Madam Chair. Thank you.
All right, that moves us on to reports. We have crack.
Nothing to report except we are going to be meeting on the 16th via Zoom meeting.
Okay, nice. CPC.
Nothing to report. Just waiting for town meeting.
Okay. NP and EDC.
No meeting, nothing to report, but town meeting is 2 weeks from today, and I think it's at 5. I think it's the same time as our meeting. I think. Is that right?
Yeah, Jeff had emailed about changing that time, but Jeff, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I had sent around an email to everybody a couple weeks ago about asking to either switching to earlier that day or if we wanted to do a different day. And kind of the consensus from the group was to do, I believe, like a 1 p.m. meeting that day. So I'd be continuing to date certain. And then if we start running up against the clock, we'll figure out something. But we can do like an HTC meeting and we'll just like split it over 10 days. So, but I think the agenda, we'll try to get it down so we can just do a couple hours and then give everyone a break before town meeting of some kind.
It's funny, Jeff, you think HDC and split the meeting, and I'm thinking play the Oscars music and move them on.
You're the chair, Ashley. You can drive the bus as fast as you want.
All right, there's no other committees, so commissioners' comments.
Well, yes, but I know it's very late in the day, so I wanted to talk about, well, first of all, the legal opinion, which we've asked Jeff for the Chapter 91 license and the SBPF NETCO responsibility. I wanted to talk about criminalizing fines, also talking about getting a full-time enforcement officer, which would be part of having a list of enforcements. I'd really like to know, what enforcements are outstanding. But at this point, I feel it's not as though we can't wait for 2 weeks to discuss it.
So real quickly, not to interrupt, sorry, Joe. I saw your hand go up and I started talking. We do actually keep kind of a running list of enforcements, so I'll make sure that that's up to date and sent off to you guys because we do check in on those sites from time to time as well. So we can have that to you, but we can have the rest of that stuff hopefully to you before the next meeting. I'll have to check in with George on how fast he'll get that opinion back, but I'll at least have a time frame for that.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, so I was just going to say it'd be great to get the enforcement fines in order so we can get that moving. I feel like right now we got a cap on him, but we can't do anything.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. I'm in full support of those statements and getting our fining in line. I'd love for someone to just be like handing out expensive tickets.
Well, so there are some limits and rules to ticketing that move you from non-criminal to criminal. I'm not aware of any conservation agents in the state that have the ability to issue criminal level citations. So that's where it gets a little dicey. That's something that you have to involve an actual sworn police officer to issue criminal complaints. So that's why if you like issue a fine and no one pays it or they don't do it and it moves to criminal, that actual criminal citation gets issued by the police and not by the Board of Health or Natural Resources or one of the other ticketing agencies. So there's a threshold that's unfortunately set by the state. So non-criminal dispositions end in Massachusetts at $300. So that's kind of the cap.
Well, I'm bringing that up because we have to be able to raise the level of fines one way or another. I don't know how we're going to go about it, and then we can discuss it at a different day. But I would almost like to have us write a letter to the select board saying that we need a full-time, enforcement officer, because Jeff, you and Joe are snowed under obviously already. And, we're sort of semi-toothless, in so many ways. I find it immensely frustrating.
Yeah, Jeff?
I will tell you, and I will speak for a few other fellow departments, whether it's Plus or Health or us. We all need more people to do it. I mean, the fact that like the health department does restaurant inspections for the 200 food establishments we have with one person. And then Artel does all of the septic inspections and tests. We're all woefully understaffed and for those kinds of things. So hopefully someday that changes, but it's not necessarily just a conservation commission problem for not having that kind of personnel. It's kind of a town-wide issue because a lot of the stuff is specialized and it's just tough to do. I mean, I don't want to speak for building, but I know they could probably use another 2 or 3 building inspectors to get through all the buildings that they do, just to do random compliance checks, not just building permit closeouts and things. It would be super ideal. So go to town meeting, change the budget. That's on.
I suggest we send a letter to the select board on that subject.
Sure. Do you want me to try to write something?
Madam Chair, through you, my answer is an emphatic yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it would have pull to actually help us fine and enforce more effectively, then I'm all for it. Because I don't think they're going to deputize us to be inspecting and handing out tickets.
No.
I can just see Joe now flashing his badge.
No. You unfortunately would have to be at least a part-time employee of the town. Ashley, you're a town employee. You might be able to swing it. Maybe.
I hand out detentions, not tickets.
Come on, we'll give you a 10-gallon hat.
All right. Are there any other commissioners' comments? Seth?
Yeah, just not separate, but related to the fine. I know that we've talked about the $50 per day, and I don't know if that comes from the local regulations or where it comes from, but I believe reading in the actual Wetlands Protection Act, not the regulations, the Enabling Act, it says that anybody who violates that can be punishable by a fine of not more than $25,000. So I don't know how that would play in with the fining structure.
So that's a fine that has to get issued by the actual state agency.
Okay.
Yeah, that would
I
be
asked that question too. So.
Yeah.
I would love to write a ticket for $25,000 for some of these things, but unfortunately, that is not within our purview at the moment.
We're gonna look into it. All right. If there are no other commissioners' comments, we'll move on to administrator staff reports.
No, I got some work to do in the next 2 weeks, so hopefully we'll get a chance to do it. But we'll get all that stuff together for everybody as quick as we can.
Thank you, Jeff. All right.
Yes.
So
Thank you for hanging out till 8:30. It was a long one.
I think if we were in a room together, there might have been a brawl tonight. So it's better that we were virtual.
I gotta tell you, in all my years of doing this, that isn't even a top 10 angry debate. So I wasn't too bad.
Wasn't too
It was
bad.
way worse. Yeah, I've seen tears at commission meetings.
I've seen many tears.
So
many tears.
I've seen yelling. I once watched a book get thrown. So I mean, it was pretty tame.
Yeah.
All right, I'm a fiery redhead.
So.
All right.
One more thing.
done? Yes, Jeff.
Yes, before you adjourn. Also, don't forget that town elections are next week as well.
Yes, the 16th.
Yes.
All right. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Most definitely.
All right. So by roll vote, Beal,
Our ballots just came in the mail today. Hope you all have your ballots. Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye, aye.
Popham.
Aye.
All right, this meeting is adjourned.
Don't go away yet. Who was going to town meeting physically?
I don't,
They'll probably make me go.
is it in the auditorium? I haven't followed enough.
Yeah, they're gonna try and do spacing in there. I don't know how it's gonna work, but.
Well, they're going to do spacing in the auditorium and the gym. And then there'll be a screen in the gym showing the same things that will be in the auditorium. And it's first come, first serve. So if you want a comfortable seat in the auditorium, you should get there earlier.
Yeah, because the auditorium